Okay. Good morning, everyone. It is March 23rd, 2017, and I am calling the California Board of Accountancy meeting to order. We will go ahead and start with a roll call. Oh, I'm sorry, that's me.
You're appointing someone.
I'm going to point over to you, Mr.
George
Baha.
Familat.
General Yang.
Jose Campos.
Alicia Burha.
Michael Savoy.
Mark Silverman.
Deirdre Robinson.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Sonia Youngson Park.
Larry Kaplan.
Katrina Salazar.
Sochi Leon.
All right, well, thank you. I'm going to just go ahead and start with a couple opening remarks. The CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority of the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. So hopefully that establishes everything. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and start with item 1, and that is the introduction of the new California Board of Accountancy member, Sunny Youngsun Park. So welcome very much to the Board of Accountancy. I am pleased to have you be with us today. Ms. Park was appointed by the Senate Rules Committee on Wednesday, January 11th, 2017. Ms. Park joins us with a very distinguished career. She is currently the principal partner at Park and Asher, and is certified by the California State Bar Association as a specialist in estate planning, probate, and trust law. Ms. Park has served as president of the Orange County Korean American Bar Association and has served as a tax advisor for the Korean General Consulate's Office Customs and Tax Advisory Committee. Holy cow. She is currently, she sits as a member of the Human Relations Task Force for the city of Huntington Beach. She has earned a BA from Yonsei University, which I had actually the pleasure to visit when I was in Korea last year. I know, so that was actually fun. Her JD degree from Golden State University Law School, School of Law, and her LLM degree in taxation from New York University School of Law. So I hope you will all welcome me and help me welcome Sunny Park to the committee. And if you have any questions, please let us know. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I don't know if you had any words of wisdom.
No, I'm just getting used to it, especially the color of papers. You know, I don't know
yeah.
color when the public is watching me. So.
We are a very colorful group here at the Board of Accountancy, so welcome to that. All right, so we are going to go ahead and move on to item B, resolution for retiring Qualifications Committee member Eric Borgini. Hopefully I did not butcher his name. Sorry about that. So Mr. Borgini is the former California Board of Accountancy Qualifications Committee member, and he has served on the Qualifications Committee since March 2015 through March 2017. We have the resolution here in front of you. I am not going to go ahead and read through all of that, but if you have a chance to take a look at it, please do. But I would like to get a motion for the resolution.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so a motion by Mr. Campos and a second by Ms. Salazar. Is there any comments from the board members? Any public comments? All of that, I will call for a vote.
Alicia Burha,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familat,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Sochi Leon,
Yes.
Jen Oyang,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Sorry. Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
and Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you with that. Thank you, and that was unanimous, so I appreciate that vote. Moving on to item 1C, a resolution for Robert Lee, former California Board of Accountancy Enforcement Advisory Committee member. Mr. Lee served on the Enforcement Advisory Committee from January 2009 through January 2017. In front of you is his resolution. Is there a motion to go ahead and approve the resolution?
I move approval of the resolution.
A second.
All right, first by Mr. Campos and a second by Mr. Savoy. Is there any comments from the board?
Yeah, he's been a tireless servant. I really appreciate Mr. Lee's efforts over the years, and sorry to see him retiring from one of our committees.
Thank you for that. Are there any comments from the public? Okay, with all of that, I'd like to call for the vote.
Sochi Leon,
Yes.
Jen Oyang,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes. Oh, thank you very much for that, and with that, the vote is unanimous. Okay, so moving on to item D, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants Committee Interest Forum. So regarding the opportunities to participate on committees with the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, they have announced that those that are interested in serving on a committee for 2017-2018 should complete the online committee interest form no later than April 21st, 2017. An overview of the time commitment for participation on a NASBA committee is provided in attachment 1. The AICPA is also currently accepting applications until July 10th, 2017 for the 2017-2018 volunteer year. And AICPA's volunteer environment, which includes a list of committees, is provided as attachment 2, and AICPA's service agreement is included in attachment 4. To ensure that staff track CBA's member interests, please email Rebecca Reed, there you go, CBA Board Relations Analyst, when you submit an interest form and provide the organization and committees that you are interested in seeking an appointment for. So if you have any questions please regarding NASBA or AICPA committees, please again contact Rebecca Reed and she will help you out. And do I need to take any comments on that?
You could take comments about people.
Oh, well, I'm hoping that the board will, if you haven't already applied to a committee or not currently serving on a committee, I hope you will consider volunteering your time to be able to do that. So, all right. So moving on to item E, report on the Assembly Business and Professions Committee informational hearing on the regulation of corporations and the impact of professional licensing. I'll turn it over to Deanne.
Thank you. On March 14th, there was a joint legislative informational hearing on the regulation of corporations and the impact on professional licensing. The goal was to review the current regulatory structure for professional corporations and assist legislators to determine if any changes are warranted to ensure sufficient protection of consumers and the public. There was testimony provided on the history and purpose of licensed professions and the regulation of corporations, which was given by representatives from the Center for Public Interest Law, the California Research Bureau, and the Office of Legislative Counsel. Additionally, representatives from several Department of Consumer Affairs boards were in attendance, including President Burhow and myself representing the Board of Accountancy. President Burhow provided opening remarks and gave an overview of our board. Executive Officer Patty Bowers was at the NASBA meeting, so I had the pleasure of providing testimony regarding the licensing process for CPAs and accountancy firms, including partnerships and corporations. I provided brief comments on the board's practice privilege program and concluded with information on the enforcement program. And it was my first time testifying in front of the legislature, and I was a nervous wreck, but it went well.
You did great. You did great. So.
The legislators were really appreciative of the information that was provided. No action was taken, but they certainly got a lot of information from all the boards that were present and all the historical information. At this point, there's no action needed by the board. We'll continue monitoring it and report back should anything come up. And I don't know, President Burhow, if you have any further comments.
You did great. It was my first time testifying too, so we were in the same boat. But I had run into Senator Newman a couple days later, and he said that we were both very poised and we seemed to know what we were talking about. So I said, great, win-win for everybody. So well done you on that. Appreciate it. So. Okay, item F, discussion and possible action regarding the need to appoint a California Board of Accountancy member liaison to the Peer Review Oversight Committee. Well, I'm happy to have Mr. Franzella discuss this item.
Thank you. Good morning. The purpose of this item is to allow the CBA the opportunity to discuss whether it believes it is appropriate to appoint CBA member liaisons to the Peer Review Oversight Committee. The CBA is being asked to adopt staff recommendation to appoint a Northern and Southern California liaison to the PROC. At the time the PROC was originally, or the CBA originally established the PROC and its various roles and functions, it decided against appointing any liaisons because there was concern that a liaison could be exposed to actual peer reviews, which would not allow the liaisons to be impartial if the matter was later brought to the CBA for disciplinary consideration. But the PROC has evolved in such a way that members do not look at actual peer reviews, but instead oversee peer review program providers. The PROC members go out to Cal CPA and audit what that organization's been doing to ensure that the peer review program is working as intended. If a CBA liaison was established, the liaison would not go to the site visits and would not see any confidential information. This would thus allow them to remain impartial if a case were ever brought before the board. A liaison would help improve the communications between the CBA and the PROC by communicating various CBA policies and assignments, merging issues, and providing committee reports at the CBA meeting. So again, staff recommend that the PROC or the CBA establish liaisons for the PROC, and if that is the case, the CBA president would make the appointments. And at this time, I'm happy to turn discussion back over to President Burhout and answer any questions members may have.
Are there any questions from the board? Ms. Wright, and I'll Mr. Campos.
Yeah. If this is not appropriate, recommendation at this time, then just please let me know where to insert this comment, perhaps later on in the day. But with these board CBA liaisons to the various committees, how would we proceed with a recommendation that these liaisons be able to attend through an internet facility such as Skype, Zoom, and so forth, rather than actual physical presence at the meetings? Because my experience has been that the involvement of the member is relatively brief, because you don't actually interact or get involved in what the committee actually does. And where I'm from, Silicon Valley, virtually all of these meetings that require less than, say, an hour of time are done over the internet, in light of the fact that the technology has advanced to such a point that it's comparable to physical presence in large part.
Mr. Campos?
We clearly, these advisory committees are highly important to the work that this board does. We ask the chairs of those committees to come to our board for a very limited role in providing us updates. I think it's only fair that a liaison attend physically a meeting and partake and gather feedback that the committee may have for this particular body. And so I am highly supportive of adopting staff's recommendation. And as a matter of fact, I'll just make a motion to accept staff's recommendation of appointing liaisons to the PROC.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Campos.
I second.
Okay, and a second by Mr. Savoy. And I'd have to agree with you, Mr. Campos. The committees really appreciate when board members are able to attend the meetings and participate, and I completely understand where you're coming from, Ms. Wright, in terms of, limitations, but having a physical presence there, I think, really contributes to the conversation. So I would have to agree with you on that, Mr. Campos. Is there any other comments from the board? Any other comments from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for a vote.
All right. Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Jin Oyang,
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Deidre Robinson,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhout.
Yes. All right, with that, it is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Franzella, for that, and thank you for the board. And I will be, and if anyone is interested in being a liaison, please let us know. Otherwise, I will be reaching out to you and recruiting you. It's going to be fun times for you.
Voluntold, I hear?
Maybe. Cannot confirm or deny that. So thanks very much. All right, moving on to item G, proposed 2018 California Board of Accountancy meeting dates and locations. Ms. Reed.
Hi.
Agenda item 1G provides members with a list of the proposed 2018 meeting dates and locations. CBA staff have selected the meeting dates to avoid major and religious holidays. And for your reference, attached is the 2018 calendar, which reflects the proposed dates. And the CBA may choose to make a motion to adopt or modify the proposed meeting dates and locations. And at this time, I would like to turn it back over to President Burhout and would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so, and do I need to entertain a motion first before I ask a question? I don't always Robert's rules.
Just ask you a question.
All right, fine, I'll ask my question. So in terms of, and I'd asked this before, so the switch in January that has to do, now that it's going to be in Northern California, that has everything to do with the office location move. Fantastic. Sorry. Thank you for that.
Are all Northern California meetings going to be in the new corporate headquarters?
So yes, that is our intent going forward, both the board and committee members. When we meet in Northern California, we would meet in our conference room. That was part of the negotiation in getting approval from the former director for the Board of Accountancy to actually have its own full hearing room, and so that was part of that negotiation. Now, that doesn't mean if a need comes up for us to meet somewhere other than Northern California that we're limited in doing that, but that would be really on a case-by-case.
And so on that same note, don't take that away. So on that same note, so for example, that's great that we can have the meetings up there, but if there is another occasion where we have to have the meeting in another location in Northern California, would we still be able to try and find a location for that? Would we still be able to do that?
We would have that flexibility if there was a need. For example, if there was
Flooding.
Yeah, absolutely, flooding. Or if there was a need due to stakeholder participation and we wanted to have it in, for example, the Bay Area or somewhere else to accommodate stakeholder participation, then we will continue to have the flexibility to do that. But part of the negotiation, our site is leased. We own the conference room solely, so it's not a shared conference room. It's the Board of Accountancies, and it's quite lovely.
There you go.
I move approval of the recommended meeting dates.
Can I ask one? I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm
I have
so
a
sorry.
First and second.
I have a
before we
first by
have
Mr.
discussion.
Campos. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, second by Mr. Savoy. Ms. Wright.
Okay. Oh, Rebecca, do you take tax filing dates into account in setting your agenda of major, well, it's not a holiday, but of major outside commitments of CPAs who engage in that kind of practice? And September 15th is a major extended due date on tax returns. No?
So if I could speak to that. Historically, the dates that were established really was at the direction of the board. We just slightly alter them, so staff really doesn't have a lot of involvement in the dates. But if the members as a whole would like us to avoid tax filing, even we have meetings sometimes at other times that might conflict with activities in the profession, we're happy to make that adjustment. So we would just need that direction from the board.
Okay, Mr.
And
Kaplan?
2017 hasn't changed, correct?
Correct. Okay. Are there any other questions from the board? Any comments from the public? Okay, with that, I'd like to call for the vote.
All right. Alicia Burhout,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
Jen Oyang,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Sunny Young Sung Park,
Yes.
Deidre Robinson,
Yes.
and Katrina Salazar.
Okay, with that, the vote is unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item H, an overview of the license renewal process and continuing education requirements for certified public accountants, public accountants. Ms. Fuller.
Good morning, thank you. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CBA with an overview of the license renewal requirements for CPAs, PAs, corporations, and partnerships. I will highlight the license renewal requirements, renewal-related reporting requirements, continuing education exemption extension requests, as well as information on the renewal unit's staffing and annual workload. I'd like to begin by addressing the renewal requirements for CPAs. A CPA license expires every other year on the last day of the licensee's birth month. A licensee born in an even year will have a license that expires in an even year, while a licensee born in an odd year will have their license expire in an odd year. The CBA mails a license renewal application, which is attachment 1, along with all necessary renewal information and instructions to the licensee's address of record approximately 90 days prior to the license expiration date. A licensee has various options when renewing. To renew active, a licensee is required to submit the license renewal fee, the license renewal application, which includes the peer review reporting form, or PR1 form, and document the completion of 80 hours of continuing education, which we refer to as CE. Presently, the renewal fee is $120 and is the same whether renewing active or inactive. To renew inactive, a licensee is required to submit the license renewal application and the appropriate license renewal fee. However, no CE is required to renew inactive. And lastly, to renew a retired status license, a licensee is required to submit the renewal application, but no CE or fee is required. For those licensees renewing in an active status, the completion of 80 hours of qualifying CE may be documented on the CE reporting worksheet, which is provided on the reverse side of the application. Or they may use their own CE spreadsheet, provided it includes all the pertinent information. In order to count as qualifying CE, a course must be a formal program of learning which contributes directly to the professional competence of a licensee in public practice. This allows a licensee to select from a wide range of providers, which it could include private institutions, national, state, and local accounting organizations, universities and colleges, and even a licensee's own accounting firm. Licensees complete their CE in specified subject areas. Attachment 2 is a quick reference guide which is available on our website that outlines these areas. The 7 CE subject area requirements are the 50-50 requirement, ethics, governmental auditing, accounting and auditing, fraud, regulatory review, and the 20 and 12 requirement. I will provide a brief overview of each subject area. The 50-50 requirement. A licensee must complete a minimum of 40 hours or 50% of the required CE in technical subject areas in order to maintain or enhance their technical skills and knowledge. Technical subjects can include accounting, auditing, fraud, taxation, consulting, financial planning, ethics, regulatory review, computer and information technology, and specialized knowledge. The remaining 40 hours may be completed in non-technical subject areas, such as communication skills, word processing, sales, marketing, motivational techniques, negotiation skills, and office practice and personnel management. Ethics education is the second subject area. This requires a licensee to complete 4 hours of ethics education as part of the required 80 hours of CE. The course subject matter must pertain to a review of nationally recognized codes of conduct, emphasizing how the codes relate to professional responsibilities. Case-based instruction focusing on real-life situational learning, ethical dilemmas facing the accounting profession, or business ethics, ethical sensitivity, and consumer expectations. Next is governmental auditing. If a licensee engages in planning, directing, conducting substantial portions of fieldwork, or reporting on financial or compliance audits of a governmental agency during their renewal reporting period, they must complete 24 of the 80 required hours of CE in governmental accounting, auditing, or related subjects. Accounting and auditing CE is required if a licensee engages in the planning, directing, approving, or performing of substantial portions of the work, or reporting on an audit, review, compilation, or attestation service of a non-governmental agency during their renewal reporting period, and must complete 24 of the 80 hours required in accounting and auditing CE, or which we refer to as A&A. The governmental auditing CE requirement satisfies the A&A CE requirement. A licensee subject to governmental auditing or ANACE must also complete 4 hours of fraud CE specifically related to the prevention, detection, and/or reporting of fraud affecting financial statements. The regulatory review requirement requires licensees to take a course every 6 years or every 3 renewal cycles. This course provides information on the provisions of the CBA's laws and regulations. This is the only CE subject area that requires a licensee to complete a CBA pre-approved course. To be CBA approved, these courses must meet certain criteria, which is submitted to the renewal unit for review and approval. All of the approved courses are a minimum of 2 hours, and a listing of the approved regulatory review courses can be found on the CBA's website. Also, this requirement can be completed prior to its due date. If taken early, CBA staff will establish a new 6-year due date. For the 20 and 12 requirement, a licensee must complete a minimum of 20 hours in each year of the 2-year license renewal period, with a minimum of 12 hours in technical subject matter. This requirement helps ensure licensees are maintaining a currency of knowledge throughout their license renewal cycle. In addition, the CBA requires a few renewal-related reporting requirements. As of January 2014, all licensees are required to report peer review information at the time of license renewal. As previously stated, the PR1 form is included in the renewal packet and must be completed and submitted with the license renewal application. Also effective January of 2014, fingerprints are required by the CBA for all active CPAs, licensees. A licensee who is not fingerprinted at the time of initial licensure or where no electronic fingerprint record is on file need to be fingerprinted before renewing in an active status. Licensees residing in California will submit fingerprints electronically via live scan, and those living outside California will submit a fingerprint hard card. Licensees actively serving in the military are exempt from this requirement. Now, not all licensees renew by their expiration date. In these cases, the license is placed in a delinquent status, which means the license has expired. Individuals with an expired license may not hold themselves out to the public as a CPA or engage in the practice of public accountancy. The CBA will send a delinquent license renewal application to the licensee's address of record approximately 30 days after the license expiration date. To renew an expired license in an active status, a licensee must complete a minimum of 80 hours of qualifying CE within the 24-month period prior to submitting the license renewal application and is subject to the 20 and 12 requirement. New licensees, or those who converted to active status prior to their license expiration date, will most likely not be required to complete the full 80 hours of CE. These licensees with a prorated CE requirement will have to complete additional CE if renewing 6 months or more after the license expiration date. As licensees complete their CE, the CBA does recognize that extenuating circumstances might impact their ability to complete some or all of their CE requirements. The CBA offers an option to request an exemption from or an extension of time to complete the CE requirements. These requests must be accompanied by substantiating documentation and fall under one of the following categories: health reasons, military service, or other good causes such as death in a family or natural disasters. In addition, the CBA also allows for an extension of time for a licensee to complete the governmental auditing, ANA, and fraud CE subject matter requirements if licensees meet certain criteria. I would now like to move on to the renewal requirements for accountancy corporations and accountancy partnerships. Their renewal cycle is also every 2 years, and the expiration date is based on the original license issuance date. To renew a corporation license, the firm must have at least one shareholder holding an active license with the CBA in good standing. The license renewal application must be accompanied by a list of all shareholders, a fee of $120, and the PR1 form. To renew a partnership license, the firm must have at least 2 partners and at least one must hold an active license from the CBA in good standing. The license renewal application must be accompanied by a list of partners, a fee of $120, and the PR1 form. While I have outlined the renewal process for licensees, I would now like to provide a brief overview of the renewal unit. Staff review each renewal to ensure licensees are in compliance. When deficiencies are found, staff will reach out via letter and/or for small clarifications may reach out directly by email or phone to bring the licensee into compliance. The renewal unit consists of 13 positions who annually process renewals for approximately 41,000 CPAs, PAs, 1,800 accountancy corporations, and 650 accountancy partnerships. In order to continue to provide outstanding customer service, staff also responds to over 20,000 emails and 25,000 phone calls annually. This concludes my presentation, and I'd like to turn it over to President Burhow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fuller. Are there any questions from the board? Ms. Wright?
Thank you. As just a general question and a clarification or point of understanding for myself, obviously I'm aware of the ANA requirement and I'm aware of the governmental requirement. Both are specific areas. I have no objection to those requirements. My question is, why doesn't something similar exist for the field of tax, which is equally as complicated, if not more so, than either one of the above two reference fields?
You mean in specific hours in which?
Comparable requirement, which for these other areas of expertise is specified by number of hours of CE that have to be taken in those areas.
Actually, Pat can answer that.
So the CE requirements that we have, really, that's at the board's discretion, and so any modifications or additions to continuing education that the board would like to see is something that we should agendize and give the board an opportunity to deliberate that at a future date.
Is that good?
I just would like a clarification, just an understanding is all I'm really asking for.
Which committee would deal with that?
CPC? That's what I was thinking. All right, so going to CPC, yeah, see how the CPC committee.
Take a look at that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, so we'll go ahead and put that on to a future agenda item. I had just one question regarding the fingerprinting. So it says, it says licensees actively serving in the United States military are exempt from this requirement. Does that mean just until they return
Correct.
back and then they have to get the fingerprints if
Correct.
they haven't gotten it? Okay. Just curious about that. Any other board member comments? And I don't need public comments on this, or do I? I'm going to ask for public comment. All right, at this time, thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Moving on to item I, update and outreach for improving employee benefit plan audits in the profession and possible continuing education requirements for the employee benefit plan audits. Mr. Bone, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Madam President and members. The purpose of this item is to update the board on staff's outreach efforts regarding employee benefit plan or EBP audits. In May 2015, the United States Department of Labor released a report indicating that 39% of EBP audits contained major deficiencies with respect to one or more relevant generally accepted auditing standards. After that report was published, this board discussed the topic at several committee and CBA meetings in 2015 and 2016. During those meetings, staff were directed to help educate our licensees on this matter through social media, by publishing articles in the Update newsletter, and through the CBA website. The attachments to this agenda item provide some examples of our outreach efforts. In addition, staff were directed to reassess the possible need for a change in CE requirements and report back to the board. During the 2015-16 fiscal year, the CBA received 6 enforcement referrals from the U.S. Department of Labor, and so far in the current fiscal year, the CBA has received 2 such referrals. At this time, staff do not recommend that the CBA take action to require CE for the performance of EBP audits. Rather, we propose continuing to address this issue as follows. First, continue to monitor and report to the board any Department of Labor referrals regarding EBP audits. Second, add additional content to the CBA website to further explain this issue. Third, increase the use of social media and include video technology to enhance engagement with those audiences. Fourth, continue to discuss this topic in the update newsletter. Fifth, partner with stakeholders to help increase awareness. And sixth, report back to the board on this issue within 12 months. This concludes my remarks, Madam President, and I turn it back to you for comment or discussion.
All right. Do we need a motion for this, for the recommendations?
No, only if there's some specific direction that you want us to take.
Okay. Is there any questions from the board? Ms. Wright?
Thank you. The chief accountant from the Department of Labor visited one of our meetings about a year or so ago. It was my best understanding in speaking with him that he was visiting various state boards asking that the enhanced CE be applied for people who were doing these types of audits. Do we have any information on how other states responded is question number one. And question number two, if we do approve this decision, then I'm sure we would, it would be appropriate that we advise the chief accountant at the Department of Labor of what our decision is.
When this agenda item was presented, I believe we included it in the July board meeting agenda item. At that time, there were no other states that had CE specific to employee benefit plan audits. So as of this one, we didn't go back and check. It hasn't been quite a year. If that's the pleasure of the board, we can certainly go back out to other states to see if anybody has, since that time, adopted CE requirements for EBP audits and report back.
Mr. Savoy?
I think, my memory's not long, but I believe at one of the previous board meetings I had brought up that I thought it was important, specifically because when he addressed us, he was saying the large preponderance of these audits take place in California. And I thought if any education would have to get changed, we'd be at the front of it rather than other states, so they would follow suit with us. So I'm okay with the recommendation, but I also think we need to bring it back to CPC also in talking about, similar to you, about tax, whether people that do these planned audits really need to get more education specifically because of the problem that's very pervasive on these audits. So,
and I think just my own recollection on, this came before the CPC, this issue was deliberated on, and I think there were no specific actions that we directed staff to pursue. I didn't think there was any need to go back to the DOL with any communications as a result of those deliberations. But I thought the premise was, so I wouldn't be too quick to put this back on a CPC agenda, just because I think we wanted to allow the outreach, the communications, the fact that this was disseminating across the auditor world, if you will, to take hold and let that sort of cause self-correcting avenues, and as opposed to mandating some new requirement, across the board that may or may not solve the problem that ultimately is being sought out.
Yeah.
That's correct. There was the outreach component, and there was also a request to bring it back in 6 months, so we wanted to be responsive to the board's request. But I think you're correct in that there hasn't been probably enough sufficient time on the outreach component to actually get it out to licensees and have them implement potentially whatever that messaging is, for it to have an impact on any potential enforcement referrals.
Well, and you also have the enforcement pipeline and process, right? You've got, and there have been some cases in that regard, and so allowing those to also be socialized and the specifics of that getting out into the consumer world, if you will, is another component of allowing that outreach, communications, and enforcement process to go.
and as you remember, when he came and was rather harsh towards us,
He was.
I asked him specifically, has he reached out to the California Board of Accountancy with any of his deficient audits? And he said, no, I've reached out to the AICPA. Well, I said that, if they didn't then in turn reach out to us, why are you ragging on us to do something that we were not even aware of? And I think we were pretty, he came heavy-handed, and I think he left, slightly less heavy-handed than he had tried to talk to us about.
Ms. Salzman?
I'd like to comment on that. The write-up here, and I appreciate that it says during fiscal year 16-17, we've only received 2 DOL referrals so far. So really the question I have for staff is, do you feel that the referral process is working? Is there anything that the staff can do or the board can do in that area to help facilitate that? Because we come back to the same issue, which you point out, which is we can only act on what we're aware of.
So the referral process used by the DOL is now an email-based system, and so they send it to me through a secured server. I pull them down, and it works efficiently, but again, we've only received 2 so far this fiscal year, so unless they send them to us, it's not really brought to our attention.
And I guess my question is there any conversation back with them to say, is this all you expected to send us? And I'm just wondering if they think we're getting more than we're receiving. I know that may seem like an odd request, but again, the initial claims versus the evidence currently being presented to us don't seem to match up.
It should be their full universe, because that was part of the, the commitment they made to NASBA and the AICPA last year. They are notified when we get their complaints, but we can reach out to them to see if there's anything we've been missing. But I haven't had any emails come through in a while.
So on that same point, we had also discussed that we thought a great deal of this would get covered under the peer review aspect as well. So I guess my question to you is, have you seen more reports to you of deficient audits from the peer review aspect, and which reach far more reaching is that if the firms didn't tell the peer reviewers that they were doing this kind of work, that they would know about it to peer review it. But so one avenue obviously is from the DOL, but I'm asking, have you seen any in the peer review deficiency area as well on these type of audits?
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. It's something I'll go back and look at to see how the peer reviews maybe since the DOL. I do know there was a number of reports that were, there's a more technical term, but undone, because there was the lack of transparency from the firm or by the peer reviewer in selecting must-select engagements. And I know those were pulled back, and then I believe we have cases open in those particular areas. But I don't know since maybe I believe it was this year or a year ago this month that Mr. Dingwall came to the board if we've seen any increase, but I can go back and look and see what we can find.
Ms. Salzer.
And then the only other thing I would mention is, this does touch upon a subject I was going to mention under my committee, but I believe that it's appropriate here. On my committee with NASBA, I know they are working to try to continue to enhance getting information, and have in the committee meeting mentioned that they are trying to work with AICPA to make sure that there's another parallel mechanism, because it sounds like our experience of limited referrals is not unique to the universe of state boards that they are working with on enforcement issues. So it seems to be part of a larger.
Yeah, one of the things that NASBA does from time to time is they follow up on, they're keeping an inventory as well in a way, and then they'll reach out to us to assess whether or not we've gotten the same number of DOLs. We don't disclose any of the pertinent information of the identities of the referrals, but we do at least give them a category of, yes, we received in this fiscal year or this quarter 1, none. So there are some tries to be some checks and balances to make sure that the inventory that NASBA is hearing from the DOL is actually getting to the boards of accountancy. I haven't received one of those in a little bit, but they were doing through the past year.
Any other questions from the board? Any other questions from the public? And then, oh, sorry, go for it.
So just for clarification, for a future CPC, we're bringing back the tax CE item, and I just wanted to get clarification if the board wants us also to bring back the CE issue on these types of audits.
I think we said whether it's, I don't know if 6 months has expired since we deferred it, so.
I think it's premature to,
Yeah,
I mean-
until we hear.
Okay. All right, so we don't need to take a motion on specific staff recommendations. Okay, so one last time, but so Christy doesn't get mad at me. So any other comments from the public? Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Bone. Thank you so much. All right, and going on to Ms. Shields and item J, discussion regarding the March 2017 California Supreme Court decision, City of San Jose versus Superior Court of Santa Clara County, the California Public Records Act, and the use of private electronic devices to conduct public business. Take it away.
Good morning. In June 2009, a requester named Ted Smith submitted a Public Records Act request to the City of San Jose seeking public records involving specific officials related to a downtown San Jose redevelopment. The city turned over everything except Smith's request for, quote, any and all voicemails, emails, or text messages sent or received on private electronic devices used by Mayor Chuck Reed or members of the City Council or their staff regarding any matters concerning the City of San Jose, including any matters concerning Tom McAnery. The city denied the request and argued that California's Public Records Act doesn't cover private emails. This is because the PRA defines a record as something that a state agency uses, prepares, owns, or retains. However, the Supreme Court did not accept that argument, holding that when a city employee uses a personal account to communicate about the conduct of public business, the writings may be subject to disclosure under the California Public Records Act. If public officials could evade the law simply by clicking into a different email account or communicating through a personal device, sensitive information could routinely evade public scrutiny. The court did clarify, however, that to qualify as a public record, at a minimum, a writing must relate in some substantive way to the conduct of the public's business. If a city official writes a text to their spouse and says their coworker is an idiot, that may not be a public record.
All right.
Following the decision, the CBA will need to craft policies and procedures to determine how it collects public records from private accounts, if any, that are used by staff or board members. The court opinion only says a reasonable effort to search records must be made, but allows agencies to decide how. A copy of the Supreme Court's decision is in your packet. Any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So if regarding appointees that have, and we'll just go with appointees since that's what most of us are here, so versus a CBA email account versus a private email account that some of us use and some of us don't use. So do we just kind of like leave things alone until someone requests to see our emails regarding anything related to public business?
Well, if you're concerned about
Not concerned per se, but
a request or any other type of inquiry, including discovery, regarding accounts, I think that you could, and I think they're available to the board members, to establish your own account with the California Board of Accountancy. That way it's easy to segregate those communications that are directly related to public business and those that are not.
Because that was my question, because if I have a private account, I want to be able to have folks be able to access my emails related to Board of Accountancy versus emails related to sending a recipe to my sister-in-law.
Right. I mean, and then, the way that this would probably work would be, if you did, then you would just be asked to search your own accounts and let us know if you have any responsive records. But if you are concerned about, that issue, I would recommend exploring the option of getting your own CBA email account.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Ms. Wright?
Forgive my ignorance, maybe I should know this, but does this extend so far as simply the transmission of information as an example, Rebecca from time to time sends us copies of decisions. Sometimes she asks for an approval in the way of a response. Is that encompassed within the scope of this?
Yes, I think, remember, under the Public Records Act, it's a record if it's for public business. That's what the court is saying. Now, there's also exemptions from disclosure. So whether something's a record is one question, whether it's disclosable is a different question. So those records that are, everything that, as the court indicates, relates in some way to public business is a public record. Is it disclosable? That's the next question. And there's a bunch of categories in the Public Records Act that exempt records from disclosure, and those things include confidential, privileged communications about, for instance, enforcement matters or confidential attorney-client communications. Those things would be the type of thing that are exempt from disclosure. So simply because something's a public record doesn't mean that it's open and available for inspection necessarily. You'd have to look at whether those communications fall within a privileged or confidential relationship with respect to the content of that communication. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Does CBA get many of these types of public records requests? I'm not aware of them. Yes?
We do receive quite a few public records requests. I don't know if compared to other boards, but we do receive them on a fairly routine basis.
Any other questions from the board? Any other questions from the public? All right. Well, if you have anything after, if you can think of any questions afterward, they can contact Ms. Shields. Okay, so item K, I know we don't, it's the development since the February 2015 United States Supreme Court decision, North Carolina State Board of Dental Examiners versus Federal Trade Commission, and at this point there is no updates?
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. And then my next question, going into item L before lunch, I don't know how long Mr. Santiago's presentation is going to be, so, but we can go into that.
Hi, good morning. I had planned for maybe about 15 minutes tops, and to answer any brief questions, but otherwise I was going to avail myself to any of the board members who had specific questions. You can contact me offline about your specific situation, but I hadn't planned on taking that much time.
Okay, should we take it away and get that done before lunch? Okay, so, well, thank you, Mr. Santiago. And this is again the overview of conflicts of interest. Mr. Michael Santiago, Department of Consumer Affairs. So thank you very much for being here today.
Great. Good morning or almost afternoon.
I know, almost afternoon.
I know, so I know I'm standing in the way of your
You
lunch, so
are.
I'll try to do it as best as I can. So in addition to being an attorney at DCA Legal Affairs, I'm also the department's ethics officer. And part of my duties as the ethics officer is to provide the conflicts of interest training at the board member orientation training that we give at least 4 times every year for newly appointed as well as reappointed board members. So I think I've seen a lot of you there, and if you haven't been yet, hopefully we can get you in there so you can get the overview that you're required by law to have. Although I'm not an expert on the board's issues or rules like Christy is, I have worked with both Patty and Christy on several issues dealing with conflicts of interest and this board. Particularly, I remember one for the peer review Oversight Committee. So even up to today, when I hear the word proc, it does give me goosebumps, and not the good kind. So, so let's move on. What I really wanted to just touch on really quick, I'm going to try to give you a higher level overview and kind of the Cliff's Notes of what you need to remember or just keep in mind when these things might come up. And there's 2 different areas. One is the economic interests and sort of the ones outside of it which might be more incompatible work activities, things that don't involve money. So the first area in terms of economic interest where the issues come up with are the areas of gifts, honoraria, and travel payments. So those are the big ones. And of course, the Political Reform Act, which is enforced by the Fair Political Practices Commission and the Form 700, that's where you might be familiar with all of that, in terms of what particular sources of income that you have to list on the Form 700, and that's the tool that determines whether or not there's a possible financial conflict of interest depending on your particular situation. Now, for gifts, honorary and travel payments, we're not looking at every single possible source. We're kind of looking at this box of sources where it pertains to only maybe 1 or 2 categories of sources. And the first one is economic interest, wherein the business entity, professional association, or individual is regulated by the board or an entity that offers licensing courses or CE credit. That's the first area you want to focus on. And the second one is an economic interest wherein the business entity has contracted with the board to provide goods or services. So really, when we're talking about the sources of your economic interest, those are the two you want to focus on. So it's not every single possible economic interest, gift, income, whatever it is you're talking about. We're not looking at everything. Your universe is really small. It's just those two categories. So that's why, a lot of board members stress out about that, like, oh my God, it's everything. It's not. So, you want to kind of be thankful that it's only just limited, because unlike some of the other designated positions, it actually is everything, which includes me and Christy, and almost all the executive offices in the department. So you're very limited, and so I think it makes it easier to work with when we're trying to discern whether or not you might have an economic financial conflict of interest. But for gifts, the rules are pretty simple for gifts. And we're going to contrast that with income, because for gifts you have a limit of $470 per source per year. That was recently raised from $460, so you get a whopping extra $10 in gifts for the year 2017. Now, gifts are different from income in that income is considered if you give something back of equal or lesser value. And that's pretty important because there's a different rule for income. Although the trigger for filing, for reporting your income on the Form 700 is $500 or more per source, there's no limit like there is with the gift. So that's why you wouldn't be penalized if you went over that $500 for income. And that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of which sets of rules apply. Is it a straight up gift where it's very strict and there are penalties that would apply, as opposed to whether something's income. Now this kind of comes up, this differentiation between gifts and income comes up when we talk about honoraria, whether you can receive it, as well as travel payments, meaning some entity or someone else is giving you the money, or they're providing for all of your travel payments to go to, say, a meeting or a conference or something of that nature. The general rule for honoraria is that you are prohibited from accepting honoraria. And that again pertains only to if the source of the economic interest was within one of those two categories that I just mentioned. So if you have some sort of side interest or side business, say it's scrapbooking or you collect comic books, if you had, like Comic-Con wants to pay your way to attend the yearly meeting in San Diego, that's free. You don't have to worry. You can take thousands upon thousands of dollars from Comic-Con to do that, and there's no worry. But again, once we hit those two categories, that's where you got to be careful, because you're going to most likely have to disclose, and then you're going to have to kind of keep track of, well, if that source of the economic interest that you had to report on the Form 700, if that somehow comes up before the board as a discussion, or you're going to vote and that source is in question, that's where the conflict comes into play, and you might have to disqualify yourself. Question?
So just real quick, so for example, I'm a public member, so I'm not a CPA, but, so for example, if I am, and I am in education, so it's something completely different. So if I have to go to a conference, and they're paying for my hotel, I'm paying for the conference, but they're paying for my hotel, would it be better to just go ahead and put it on the Form 700 and just rather than keeping it off?
Right, we have to determine what the source is and whether it falls into those disclosure categories, because if it does, then that's when we would have to report that on the Form 700, and then you could be subject to possible disqualification if we have a decision in front of the board or there's a discussion involving that source.
Right.
So a lot of this is case-by-case basis. I do work extensively with Patty on some of these issues when they do come up, and that's why each situation is different. I kind of can't give you the general rules, or if X happens, then Y happens, because it depends. We change one particular fact of the entity that's giving you the money or paying for your travel payments, or we change a fact of whether or not they actually are doing some sort of business in front of the board, or do they offer CE credits for your licensing population. So that's why it's pretty difficult to discern these broad rules. We just want you to make sure that if it is one of those sources of income from the disclosure categories, let's take a closer look. So travel payments. The general rule for travel payments, just like honoraria, it's kind of a little different. Travel payments in general are considered to be under the same rules as gifts. So that's pretty strict. You know, you're subject to a $470 per year per source limit, and sometimes that won't even pay for the airfare or even the hotel room if you're going. So the kind of trick here is to see if we can categorize those travel payments as income instead of a gift. That way, if it's income, meaning you've given something of equal or greater value, then we're going to avail ourselves of exceptions where we can say that it is what's called an earned income exception. So we'll be able to classify those travel payments as income, wherein that's how you would have to disclose if you hit the $500 or more limit, not limit, so much the trigger amount to put on the Form 700. But then there's no limit on that, so you can get the full value of all your travel payments, you know, the lodging, subsistence, your meals, everything of that nature related to the travel. That's when you can accept all of that. And you would only have to worry about if the source came before the board in terms of an issue, then that's when there's a possible conflict. But otherwise, that's why you wouldn't be subject to just that 470 limit, which is pretty stringent when we're looking at whether or not you could go forward and participate in the public action. So that's kind of the general areas of the economic interest. Those are the hotbed items that come up. And so if none of those ever happen to you, you're pretty much lucky because you don't have to worry about those. But let's talk about a little bit outside of economic interest. What we're really focusing a lot on are the what's called incompatible work activities. Now there's a statute in the government code, and it states it pretty generally, where it says state officers or employees shall not engage in any employment, activity, or enterprise that is inconsistent, incompatible, in conflict with, or inimical to his or her duties as a state officer or employee. And in order to help us out, they kind of list 6 different examples of what can constitute an incompatible work activity. While this list isn't exhaustive, these are the ones that we see most often, and so that's why these are the ones that are specifically enumerated in the statute. And the first one is using the prestige or influence of the state or the appointing power for private gain or private gain of another. This one comes into play if, say, you have your business card and you're trying to use it to get free admission to a concert, you know, or discounts, you know, trying to get into the hotel's, you know, personal club here. That's where you shouldn't be doing that, because, you know, that's for the official business that you're the representative, and you shouldn't be doing it to get something of benefit for you personally. Another place where this does come up with is how can you use that in terms of your curriculum vitae, or perhaps you have a personal business where your website or your marketing materials list that all the organizations, perhaps all your offices that you're involved with, and this is one of those. Well, this one's very fact-specific. You know, we have to look at how are you using your designation as a board member of this board. Is it displayed prominently in your marketing materials or your website such that you're trying to use that to gain additional business for yourself? Or is it simply where you're just listing, this is my background, you know, along with your education, other things you've done, perhaps you're board members of some different other public entities. So that's where we'd have to look at it to see what is the perception to the public and how are you using that. The second one that's listed is using state time, facilities, or supplies for private gain or advantage. Pretty self-explanatory. The third one, using confidential information for private gain or providing it to non-authorized persons. This one comes into play a lot with your closed session discussions and any kinds of information that you're gleaning from those. Those are to remain confidential, and you can't use that to help other people or perhaps your friends who are licensees and going through the disciplinary process to perhaps share, well, what does this particular board complement? What do they like to see in terms of rehabilitation if the licensee is being disciplined? So that's where you can't share that. Even though it's not a specific thing, you can't even share those impressions, because that's going to look like you're sharing this confidential information. The fourth one is receiving or accepting money from anyone other than the state for performing your duties. And the fifth one, this is the key one to remember out of all these ones, is performance of an act knowing that the act may later be subject directly or indirectly to your control, inspection, review, audit, or enforcement. So this basically is where you're doing an activity or engaging in an activity where somehow, as a board member, the board's going to review that activity. So that's where you have to be careful, and that's where we're going to look at, well, what exactly are you doing? And is it subject somehow to some review or inspection by the board, either indirectly or directly? A lot of times this can come up with those individuals who provide CE courses or have CE companies, especially if given under your Practice Act, CE providers or CE courses have to be approved personally by the board, as opposed to some third party like an association or some different educational institution. So that's where we have to be careful, is that if there is something directly related to the enforcement or oversight of your activity you're engaging in, that's going to constitute an incompatible work activity. And unlike in the financial conflicts of interest, where you can just simply disqualify yourself, the rules are different when you have an incompatible work activity. The rules state that you're prohibited from engaging in that activity. So there's no curing that defect by saying I'm going to simply, recuse myself or disqualify myself. You can't engage in that activity. So it's pretty strict here when we're talking about incompatible work activity as opposed to a financial conflict of interest. And one last issue I want to touch on, because this comes up with not just this board but all boards, is professional associations. So that touches a little bit on the incompatible work activities, also on common law conflict of interest, meaning that body of law that has been developed by the courts and is not specifically in a statute or regulation or a rule anywhere. But this one provides for, kind of a case-by-case basis, again, on your involvement with professional associations. There's no rule that prohibits you from being either a member of a professional association or from holding an office in a professional association. So I've personally seen where you have a president of a board who's also the president of an association. You can kind of see how there's a perception of, well, which hat are you wearing? And although there's nothing prohibiting that, that's where the problem lies, where what hat are you wearing? Are you trying to further the association's interest, or are you trying to further the board's? And that's where you have to be careful what's going on. And that's why, if you're, say you're the chief or the head of the legislation for the particular association, and that bill comes up before the board, what do? Well, you don't want to put yourself in the position where someone could say, hey, you're not engaged in the board's mission, but instead you're trying to further the associations. So at a minimum there, you would want to recuse yourself from that discussion and just disclose that, hey, I've been working on this, either if it's personally or maybe one of your staff, but that you have sort of a different viewpoint or aspect such that you wouldn't want to get that involved with the boards, and so you'd want to step back from that one. But again, that one's on a case-by-case basis, because you could still be the director of the ledge for that association, but it's all the staff, the rest of the people in that association that do the work, and so you're not personally involved. Or you could still vote as a board member on that legislation. It just depends how far removed are you from that. So that's why, if you do have any questions, contact Patty so she can contact me, and we can discuss whether or not, based on the specifics of your case, we really need to pursue something further and make sure that you don't run into any problems. So that's kind of my Cliff Notes version of what I think
Very well done.
is most important for you. And so if there aren't any questions, again, just feel free to contact me. You can get my information from Patty, and we can talk further.
Mr. Kaplan.
In the context of incompatible activities, I think it's clear in the instructions, but for those of us who happen to be practicing CPAs, right, so you could end up with matters, obviously if you do something wrong, matters could come before this board that's subject to that review process, but I know there's provisions as to allowing for practicing, name your profession,
right.
Right.
As a practicing board member, that's not what we're looking at, because the legislature knows that serving on these boards, we do require a certain number of professional members, and that's what you're going to do. So we kind of look outside that. That's not the part that we're really focusing on. So, but again, it's a case by case. If you're doing something particularly for your business, a lot of times where some problems might occur is if you have a business which is more than 50% of what you're doing, if that particular business is primarily speech making. That's where we need to sit down so we can discuss what's the percentage, does it really work? Because once you start getting into more than 50% of your actual work being speech making, a lot of these exceptions fall out. And so it's stricter rules when you have that kind of a business that you're engaged in.
Well, we should speak. How long are you here?
Well, like I said, if you want to have an offline discussion, we can set something up with Patty, and so we can discuss further your particular issues.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Any comments from the public? All right. Thank you so much for being here today, Mr. Santiago.
Thank you for having me.
We will be in touch. Not all of us. All right, so real quick, I am going to go on to my item M, Department of Consumer Affairs Director's report on departmental activities. Mr. Burke, because I know you probably have to head back home. So, and again, you are between us and lunch. So, getting a little hangry. So, all right.
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Burhow and members. My name is John Burke and I'm a manager at with DCA's Board and Viewer Relations team. It's good to see you all again. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on the activities of DCA since your last meeting in January. In February, Governor Brown appointed Alexis Podesta as Secretary at the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, where she has served as Undersecretary since 2015. Also in February, DCA Director Awet Kadani accepted a new opportunity. Governor Brown appointed Dean Grafilo as Director. Prior to his appointment, Director Grafilo was Chief of Staff with Assembly Member Bonta since 2012. This is a homecoming for Director Grafilo, who was previously a Commissioner with the Athletic Commission. Director Grafilo was sworn into office by Secretary Podesta on Monday, and we are very excited to have him on board. The next executive brown bag gathering will be on Tuesday, April 25th, 2017. The brown bag gatherings are an opportunity for executives throughout the department and boards to network and discuss the difficult issues they face. On the agenda, there is a presentation on how to constructively manage difficult or confrontational conversations and a DCA panel on the regulations process. I would like to take this opportunity to remind board members of required trainings. Board members are required to also complete online trainings, sexual harassment prevention, and defensive driver trainings throughout their terms with the board. Please note, 2017 is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year for DCA. All employees and board members are required to complete the online training in 2017, even if completed last year. Board members are required to take an ethics training course within the first 6 months of their appointment and repeat this ethics orientation every 2 years throughout their term on the board. The training is online, interactive, and can be completed at your convenience and takes approximately 2 hours. Defensive driver training are all state employees or appointed board members who drive a vehicle on official state business must complete the DGS-approved defensive driver training course at least once every 4 years. The training is online, interactive, convenient, and takes approximately 2.5 hours. In addition to your executive officer, please contact Board and Viewer Relations if you have any questions regarding required trainings or need any other assistance. All DCA board members are required to submit a Form 700 Statement of Economic Interests filing annually. This year's annual filing period covers the prior calendar year. The filing deadline for this year is Monday, April 3rd, 2017. You may file your annual statement any time between now and the filing deadline. However, we are requesting everyone complete the e-filing by Monday, March 27th to ensure compliance. You are required to file even if you do not have any reportable interests. The department utilizes the electronic filing system NetFile for electronic filing of Form 700s. Online filing is available 24 hours a day from any computer with internet access. NetFile saves time, ensures required data is complete, and eliminates the need for filing technical amendments. Moreover, all data is saved for your future filings. You will not need to print, sign, or mail your Form 700. This concludes the DCA update. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. Are there any comments or questions?
Quick one.
Ms. Wright?
Oh, do you have a email or something? I had completed the training and I have a comment on the updating the information included in the training.
Okay.
Part of it was updated, part of it was not. And I'd be glad to relay those comments if you have.
Okay, yes, I'd be happy to receive those. We have a board relations email address, and I'd be happy to take your comments as well.
Okay.
And refer those to the relevant people.
Any other board member comments or questions? Any comments from the public? Well, thank you very much. Have a safe travels back up north.
Sadly, I'm here for the duration. But,
Never mind. Welcome to Southern California. Hopefully the weather gets cooler. All right, at this point we are going to go ahead and break for lunch, and since we're running a little bit behind, we're going to go ahead and start at 1:45. So if I can have everyone back here at that time to begin, that'd be great. Thank you very much. I know, I do. Good afternoon. We are going to go ahead and reconvene the California Board of Accountancy meeting. Is March 23rd, and we are going to start with item 2, the report of the Vice President, Michael Savoy.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a rather extensive agenda on this item, as we've not had before, but we'll try to get through it. I'd like to bring forth appointments and reappointments first for the Enforcement Advisory Committee. William Donnelly, Thomas Gilbert, and Doug Aguilara. This item is to recommend the following individuals: the reappointment of William Donnelly and Thomas Gilbert, and the appointment of Doug Aguilara to the Enforcement Advisory Committee. The Enforcement Advisory Committee assists the CBA in advisory capacity with enforcement activities. This includes reviewing closed investigation files, providing technical guidance on open investigations, and participating in investigative hearings. I have conferred with the CBA Executive Officer to verify that the individuals have met the appropriate requirements for a license renewal and have also demonstrated the skills and the knowledge to serve as a member of the Enforcement Advisory Committee. I hereby recommend that for the following individuals to be either appointed or reappointed: William Donnelly and Thomas Gilbert be reappointed as members of the Enforcement Advisory Committee effective April 1st, 2017 through March 31st, 2019, and that Doug Aguilara be appointed as a member of the Enforcement Advisory Committee effective March 23rd through March 31st of 2019.
Do we have a motion by the board?
I move to approve the 2 reappointments and the 1 appointment.
A second.
All right, first by Mr. Campos and second by Ms. Salazar. Any comments from the board? Any public comments? Okay, with that, we'll call for the roll.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Jen Oyang,
Yes.
Sunny Yun-Sung Park,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
and Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
All right, with that, it is unanimous. Thank you very much.
The next item up for grabs is the appointments and reappointments to the Qualifications Committee. This item is to recommend the following individuals: the reappointment of, boy, I botched this one up, Savoy Kareem, Christian George, and Jose Palma, and the appointment of Angelo Hunzik and Cliff Liker Jr. to the Qualifications Committee. The Qualifications Committee assists the CBA in its licensure activities by reviewing the experience of applicants for licensure and making recommendations to the CBA. This includes conducting work paper reviews with the applicant or the employer present to verify that the responses provided are reflective of the requisite experience of the licensee. I have conferred with the CBA Executive Officer to verify that each individual has met the appropriate requirements for license renewal and have demonstrated the skills and knowledge to serve on the Qualifications Committee. I therefore bring forward Savoy Kareem, Christian George, and Jose Palma to be reappointed as members of the Qualifications Committee effective April 1st, 2017 through March 31st, 2019, and Angela Hunzik and Cliff Liker Jr. be appointed as members of the Qualifications Committee effective March 23rd, 2017 through March 31st, 2019.
All right, so I have a first from Ms. Hines and a second from Mr. Silverman. Is there any discussion?
One question. The appointment of Angela Hunzik. Only question is with respect to the degree of service. Very recent CPA and 5 years at a public accounting firm to serve on the QC. Just any further context there?
It's, when you first brought that up to me, and I had said that, I had the exact same question during the review process that I conduct. And in asking both the executive officer and who was in charge of that committee, who conducted, I'm not sure if this was face-to-face or phone interviews, they had felt very comfortable about the experience that that person had gone through and that they would be an asset to that committee. So I have to go by their recommendations, even though I have some hesitation, but I felt comfortable that what they had brought forth to me was a good person in terms of the experiences that they had gone through, and they would be a good asset and a welcome addition. So, but I did bring that specific because we usually see people at much higher levels, but that's, you know, I kind of defer when I bring up questions as you had to what their feeling was in either face-to-face or phone interviews and the responses they get from those participants. So, but I hear what you're saying.
So I agree, and I think we have to rely on the vetting that our committee chairs and the process undertakes. But I think when we have someone with sort of less experience than the average, let's say, of our advisory committees, and a fairly recent CPA, there probably should be a little bit more in the file that we get with respect to mitigating circumstances that make the individual qualified for the role. So I would just make sure we include that going forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion or questions from the board? Any public comments?
Do you ever get a public comment? It's going to be a new one right here.
Have at it.
So David Evans, Chairman of the Qualifications Committee. I want to alleviate.
Could you have a seat? Well, you have a seat.
Sit down?
Yes, I would prefer.
I normally stand.
You're just too tall. For the camera.
So, my vice chair, Kimberly Sugiyama, and I interviewed Angela extensively. Your concerns came up in our thoughts as well. But she has extensive auditing experience, managing, not just since she's been a certified public accountant, but prior to that, working for the firm. And we felt very comfortable. She's in the trenches, and quite frankly, as she sits among, if she sits among her peers in the Qualifications Committee, the extent of her experience, I think, rivals those that are both active and maybe not actively auditing at the current time. So I think she's qualified. Any questions for me?
No, thank you very much. Any other further public comments? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote. All righty.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Deidre Robinson?
Yes.
Sunny Youngsung Park?
Yes.
Jen Oyang?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
And Larry Kaplan.
Yes.
Okay, with that, the vote is unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item C.
Okay, last but not least are the appointments and reappointments to the Peer Review Oversight Committee. This item is to recommend the following individuals: the reappointment of Jeffrey DeLizer and Kevin Harper, and the appointment of Sharon Selleck to the Peer Review Oversight Committee. The Peer Review Oversight Committee assists the CBA in an advisory capacity in its oversight of the peer review program. As with all reappointments, I have verified that the individuals have met the requirements for license renewal and have demonstrated the skills and knowledge to serve on the Peer Review Oversight Committee. Therefore, I recommend the following individuals, Jeffrey DeLizer and Kevin Harper, be reappointed as members of the Peer Review Oversight Committee effective April 1st, 2017 through March 31st, 2019, and Sharon Selleck be appointed as a member of the Peer Review Oversight Committee effective March 23rd, 2017 through March 31st, 2019.
Okay, do I have a motion from the board? Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so I have a first by Mr. Silverman and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any discussion from the board or questions? Any comments from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
George Familet?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Larry Kaplan.
Yes.
Soshi Leon.
Yes.
Jen Oyang.
Yes.
Sunny Youngsung Park.
Yes.
Deidre Robinson.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
And Jose Campos.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President.
Wow.
I will pass the baton.
You had a lot of work there, so I'm impressed.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, going on to item 3, we're going to be doing the report from the Secretary Treasurer, but for item A first, we're going to have an overview of the budget process, and that is going to be Mr. Robert De Los Reyes, Department of Consumer Affairs Budget Manager. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me today. I have a PowerPoint presentation, so let me just set up there.
I think we have it in front of us, right? Okay. Yeah, we have a, if you can't see the screen, we have it in front of you there. I know, right? There it is.
All right. Good afternoon, Board President, Board members. My name is Robert De Los Reyes. I'm with the DCA Budget Office, and today I was asked to provide an overview on the annual budget process in California, really to how we develop your budget and ultimately how it's enacted in law. So before I begin, first I would like to apologize. I've been fighting a cold for the last week, so if I start coughing or sneezing, just bear with me and we'll power through the presentation. But before I begin, I just want to start with an overview of what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to start with an introduction on just how the budget process works, just with a simple flow chart and explaining some of the time frames that we have to adhere to in each step of the process. Then after that, I will go into a little bit more detail for the different stages that make up the annual budget process. Then I'll wrap it up with a conclusion and field any questions you may have on my presentation or your budget. So to begin, the budget process could be a complicated one. If you ever try to self-educate yourself or try to find a flow chart of the budget process in California, there's a lot of arrows leading to different squares and boxes. But today, my job is to try to simplify this process for you and really kind of hope the board can gain a better understanding kind of how a budget is developed and passed here in California. So just to know, like, your budget could be affected by a variety of things. Ultimately, new laws that could be enacted or passed that affect your profession, that you're regulating or introducing a new license type that the board may be required to regulate, changes in your industry that may create a need to adopt regulations for the future. All are factors that may affect your budget and may necessitate a change in your budget. So today I'm going to educate you on the process the process of each state department that needs to go through this process to change your budget, and just to start, we'll start with a flow chart today. So to begin, just to give you a better understanding on how the budget world works, we operate by fiscal year, and fiscal year begins every July 1st and ends every June 30th. In California, we always build the budget for the upcoming fiscal year or a year in advance, as we call the budget year. And really, there's 3 stages that make up the annual budget process. The first stage is the development of the governor's budget. It's important to understand that the board's budget is a component of the governor's budget. So every time we develop the governor's budget in the fall, we are also developing the board's budget as well. So the effort kicks off really in the fall and August. This is when a lot of our fiscal deadlines are imposed by the Department of Finance, and we usually wrap it up around December, just before the release of the governor's budget by January 10th. Really, the effort is a year-long effort. The Budget Office really helps our boards and bureaus really monitoring their spending and their cash flow and really prepping for the fall. So potentially, if there's a need for a budget change proposal, that's why we exist, is to really help the board in crafting and assisting you with that change. So once the governor's budget is released on January 10th, it really kicks off the second stage, which is the enactment of the budget. The governor's budget is ultimately signed into law and becomes Budget Act for the year, and the effort kicks off after he releases it. So this stage really requires the legislature to review our budget, and really it's our job to testify and discuss this budget with the legislature and the different subcommittees we're required to report to in regards to any changes in our budget. Also, just like the governor is required to release his budget by January 10th, the legislature is also required to pass the budget by June 15th, just right before the beginning of the new fiscal year. And the third stage is really our responsibility to spend within our budget, or our budgetary levels. And again, that is for the fiscal year. It begins every July 1st and ends on June 30th. So just with that brief introduction, now I'm going to go into the different stages that make up the annual budget process. So as I explained in the previous slide, the governor is required to submit the budget to the legislature by January 10th. This is when he releases his budget to the public, and he usually speaks to it from a press conference. And really when I was prepping for this presentation, I really wanted to answer questions I would have if I was a board member or if I had limited understanding of how the budget process worked. So 2 questions really I would ask is, how do we budget in California? And second, who approves our budget? And first, to answer the first question, how do we budget in California, is we utilize a basic approach called incremental budgeting. Really, this approach uses your existing budget or your current year budget as a baseline or starting point for the next fiscal year. Then we use that to incrementally adjust it by a variety of means. The first example is statewide budget letters. So statewide budget letters are budget policies that the Department of Finance issues throughout the fiscal year. It's really their communication to us working at the State Departments, issuing instructions to how we should change your budget. Examples are changes in retirement rates, general salary increases that are negotiated by the different bargaining units. We would adjust the board's budget to accommodate for those changes. The second example is budget change proposals. I'm sure the board is aware of this traditional course. This is really the board's vehicle to necessitate a change in their budget to address a need. These proposals are due in the fall to the department, and we work with you guys to review them and assist you with those proposals to be introduced as part of the governor's budget and ultimately to the legislature. And when we release your budget, we report 3 years of budgetary data. So the first year is the prior year. The prior year reports actual numbers for what the board collected in revenue and ultimately the cost that you incurred in the previous fiscal year. The current year, which is your existing budget, and the budget year is the upcoming fiscal year we're building the budget for and estimating the revenues you plan on collecting that year. And second, ultimately, who approves our budget? So the Department of Consumer Affairs reports to 2 control agencies. The first control agency is the Business Consumer Services Housing Agency, as we call in the budget office agency. So this is where our agency secretary resides. So she looks at our budget from a policy perspective. She's the chief policy advisor to the governor and her area of government. So some of the departments that come under her jurisdiction is our Department of Consumer Affairs, Department of Alcohol Beverage Control, and Department of Business Oversight, to name a few notable departments. She is the expert kind of in this area of government, and she looks at our proposals from more of a policy perspective. The second control agency is, of course, the Department of Finance. This is the main control agency that our office interfaces with. Director of Finance is the chief fiscal advisor to the governor, and of course he looks at our proposals for more on the budgetary and fiscal perspective. So with that being said, before I wrap up stage 1, I wanted to just show you guys an example to how incremental budgeting works. To keep this example simple, I just used hypothetical numbers. So if I am a state department that has a budget of $100,000, I would use that as a starting point now to how I'm going to construct my budget for the upcoming fiscal year. So as I said, we would incrementally change my budget, or our budget, with the different budget policies that the governor submits throughout the fiscal year or instructs us throughout the fiscal year, or any budget change proposals I may plan on submitting in the fall to be included as part of my budget. So once we get that, we get our new budget, and this will be our new starting point for the upcoming fiscal year when we build your budget in the fall, next fall, excuse me. And also, during this development process, we also make adjustments to your current budget to accommodate for some of these changes. For example, changes in retirement rates or general salary increases that may occur after the fact your budget is passed for the previous fiscal year, we can adjust it to accommodate for those changes. So once this is all completed and the governor releases it to the legislature on January 10th, this really kicks off the second stage, which is really getting our budget signed into law and creating the Budget Act. Just like the governor, again, has his deadline, the legislature is required to pass the budget by June 15th. And again, the questions I would ask at this stage is really who approves the budget at this stage? And really if I miss out on any adjustments in the fall development cycle or the regular budget process cycle, could I make any late adjustments to my budget after the governor releases it? So to answer the first question, the California legislature is made up of two main houses, the California State Assembly and the California State Senate. During the spring, we report to budget committees to where we discuss our budget with the legislature and testify on some of the changes we plan on making to our budget. And also, just like the governor has a set of special advisors, the legislature also has a set of advisors, the Legislative Analyst Office, who offers their assistance in analyzing the budget and provides recommendations during these subcommittees we testify in. And to answer the second question, can you make any late adjustments to your budget? The answer is yes, you can. We do have a May revision process that happens during the spring. Again, I just want to stress that this is really it's for needs or concerns or proposals that meet special circumstances. Probably, for example, like an audit, if the board pursues an audit and it's completed after the fact the budget was released, and the audit produced results to where it identifies mission critical needs or workload needs to enforcement or licensing that you would have to acquire additional resources or positions, I would say that would meet that special circumstance where we could make an adjustment to your budget. Really the vehicle at this stage would be the spring finance letter process. So ultimately SFLs or spring finance letters are BCPs, but it's really BCPs at this stage of the budget process. It's similar to the BCP, it's similar to the budget process or the budget decision process where it would have to be reviewed and approved by the two control agencies before it goes over to the legislature for approval. The timeline is much condensed than the fall, but again, this is your avenue you would take to make a late adjustment to your budget. So before we go on to stage 3, I just wanted to create another flow chart just to show you the journey to how the budget is passed and signed into law. So again, we start with the governor's budget. Then the governor's budget is introduced to the legislature, to both houses, by creating two similar budget bills. And again, the Legislative Analyst Office also provides their analysis and recommendations to the different committees that we are required to testify. So once the budget is heard in these different subcommittees and the committee makes their approvals or denials, both houses may have differences of opinion. So to air out those differences of opinion, they would have to convene in Budget Conference Committee. So once they convene in Budget Conference Committee, they do have until, I believe, June 15th to sort it out. Then once they sort it out, they would pass a final budget package and require the governor's final review, and that is how ultimately a budget is passed in California. With that, stage 3 is the last stage of the budget process. Ultimately, this stage is really our responsibility as a state department or a board within the state to operate within our budgeted levels. Really, we have to comply with the law, and the law shows our budgeted amounts now. And this is where we come in as the budget office. We assist you with expenditure and revenue projections to ensure that you are spending within your means and that you are collecting to offset some of those costs and creating kind of a solvent fund. And ultimately, the fund condition statement is more of the important document that we maintain for the board, which really maintains the condition of your fund, as it explains. We monitor cash flow in terms of how much you collect each year and how much you spend each year to ensure that the fund is solvent for the foreseeable future. And ultimately, we're here to meet with the board and board staff on a monthly or weekly basis to make sure that we are adhering to the budget. And that pretty much wraps up my presentation. So just to wrap up kind of the different steps of the annual budget process. So first we begin with the development of the budget. And really, Department of Consumer Affairs reports to 2 control agencies. One, Department of Finance, which is essentially the fiscal control of the governor, and agency, or the Business Consumer Services Agency, Housing Agency, which looks at our budget more from a policy side. Then second, the second stage is signing the budget into law. And again, the 2 main houses that makes up the legislature is the California State Senate and the California State Assembly. And they have a special set of advisors, the Legislative Analyst Office, who provides their assistance in analyzing our budget. And ultimately, it's our responsibility to adhere to that budget and to spend within our means. And hopefully that gives you a better understanding on how the budget process works. So any questions, I'm happy to answer in regards to how the budget process works.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions from the board? I just have one quick question.
Sure.
And that is, when you were saying that during the May revise, our department could make a request of additional funding?
Absolutely.
So who would that come from? Would that come from you, Patty?
Mm-hmm.
Then would we vote on that? I was just curious.
No, it would not.
It would just come from you, and then you would report to the Department of Consumer Affairs, and, all right. That was my only question. Thank you very much. So, all right, with that, thank you. Do I need to public comment? All right, is there any public comment? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate your attendance.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so, all right, moving on to item B, fiscal year report 2016-2017, financial statement. Mr. Silverman.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm pleased to present the mid-year financial statement and governor's budget for the period of July 1st, 2016 through December 31st, 2016. The CBA's fiscal year budget is set at $14,099,000, and the governor's proposed budget for next fiscal year is $13,410,000. As identified in attachment 1, the CBA collected approximately $5.1 million in revenues as of December 31st, 2016. Total revenues increased by approximately 9% from the same period last fiscal year. Revenues are projected to continue increasing due to the 2-year fee reduction that ended on June 30th, 2016, and are projected to be approximately $10 million. In attachment 2, 3, and 4, you can see expenditures. Total expenditures for the first 6 months of fiscal year 2016-17 were $7,132,630, representing a 6% decrease from the same period last fiscal year. This is primarily due to a decrease in personnel costs due to expiring limited term positions. Expenses in the training category continue to be amplified for the current fiscal year. This is reflective of the mandatory continuing education courses that the investigative CPAs are required to complete. These courses are provided by contracts with outside vendors. Enforcement expenditures continue to remain elevated due to the number of investigations that the CPA is able to complete with its increased staffing resources. Enforcement expenditures have increased over the prior 3 fiscal years as shown in Attachment 4. On Attachment 5, it provides information regarding the CBA's reserve balance. The CBA ended fiscal year 2015-16 with 10.4 months in the Accountancy Fund Reserve. As reflected on this fund condition statement, year-end revenues exceeded total expenditures by approximately $12.7 million after the general fund loan repayments received in 2016 were factored in. In January 2017, the Department of Finance issued an updated loan obligation report identifying June 2017 as the date for repayment of the remaining CBA loans made to the state's general fund. Repayment of the remaining 3 loans totaling $21 million plus interest will bring the general fund loans balance to 0. Should these loans be repaid as scheduled in June, the CBA's reserve fund will increase to approximately 27.3 months. As shown in Attachment 6, the CBA presently has 90.9 positions. This reflects the expiration of 4 limited term positions in the Enforcement Division and the addition of 2 clerical positions in the Administration Division that were added via budget change proposal for fiscal year 2016-17. The CBA is currently reviewing all program areas to determine what, if any, resources may be requested through the budget change proposal process for fiscal year 2018 to 19 and beyond. That concludes my report.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from the board? Any comments from the public? Thank you very much, Mr. Silverman. All right, moving on. Report of the Executive Officer, Ms. Bowers.
Thank you. And with your permission, Madam President, I'm going to start my report. I'll cover the first item, and then I'll invite Mr. Bone up to do the Communications and Outreach report.
Great.
And so the first item, 4A, is an update on the relocation of the board office. And finally, I'm pleased to say that we do have a firm move-in date, April 7th through the 10th. So we will pull staff offline on a Friday, work through the weekend, and on Monday we'll be at our new location. And so we will remain open to the public, even though our phone lines will go down at the current office. All of our calls will be transferred to the Department of Consumer Affairs. They have a call center there, so they'll be fielding our questions over the weekend. They have my cell number, so if there's any urgent matters, those will get handled off-site. We expect minimal impact to licensees and stakeholders. We have been working for a good year just on the transition of the move, and so I think it will be a very smooth transition. All of our email communications now that are going out have notification on them with our move date, so everyone by the time we move will be really familiar with the fact that we'll have a new address, and we're also sending notifications out to all of our licensees. So I think everyone would agree we're all pretty pleased that it's finally here and we'll finally be out of our current location.
You mean ahead of the summertime?
Ahead of the summertime. Yeah. So I don't have any updates on staffing, and so with this I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bone unless there's questions on the move that you might have.
Take it away.
Thank you, Madam President and board members. This is my outreach report. Since the last board meeting, CBA member George Famlet spoke to 75 accounting students attending Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo on February 2nd. He discussed the requirements and process to become a CPA and shared his experiences and perspectives on the profession. On February 9, CBA staff traveled to California State University Chico and spoke at an outreach event jointly sponsored by Cal CPA and the university. This event was entitled The Road to CPA, and it featured speakers from the university's accounting department, Becker CPA Exam Review, and the local chapter of Beta Alpha Psi. Staff spoke about the licensure process, including the examination, education, and experience requirements, and the common challenges that applicants face. This in-person event was also webcast live over the internet. I remain in contact with the accounting program manager at the University of California San Diego Extension campus. We're working to plan an outreach event to their students in the late summer or early fall. The majority of this program's 1,200 students are taking classes to qualify for the exam or licensure. Furthermore, throughout 2017, I'll be working with CBA executives and managers to update the CBA's communication and outreach plan with the goal of increasing and improving our use of social media, incorporating video technology into our outreach efforts, and developing new and deeper relationships with organizations that can help the CBA spread our messages to new audiences. That concludes my remarks, and I turn it back to you, Madam President.
All right, well, thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any public comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. And moving on to item D, discussion regarding reinstatement procedures for voluntary surrendered certified public accountant licenses. Mr. Franzella, welcome back.
Thank you. So the purpose of this item is to provide members with an overview of the procedures for reinstatement of a voluntarily surrendered CPA license. There is no specific CBA action required for this item. So for just over a decade now, the CBA has had an option for individuals who no longer wish to practice public accountancy or hold out as a CPA to voluntarily surrender their license. This option really kind of was born out of a lot of staff requests that staff were receiving from individuals that felt the terms delinquent and canceled carried a negative connotation, especially those who were seeking to retire before we had the retired status. Individuals who voluntarily surrendered their license under these kind of process, it's important to note that they didn't do so as a result of discipline. We have approximately just about 110 individuals who have surrendered their license over the last 10 plus years. And as part of the process, staff ensure that licensees understand the implications of surrendering the license and the process for having their license reinstated should they seek to do so in the future. And so in Attachment 1, we've provided the consent form we send out to licensees to review and sign so they're fully aware of the ramifications of and responsibilities they have if they voluntarily surrender their license and then eventually seek to have it reinstated. It's also important to note that the CBA maintains authority to discipline a license, even if it is in a surrendered status. So if for whatever reason there was no discipline or a complaint filed at the time when we saw it, and then something comes to light shortly thereafter, we still maintain the control to seek disciplinary action. So for licensees to have a license reinstated, they must petition the CBA for consideration. To date, we've only had one licensee seek reinstatement of the license since we've started doing this. And back then, when we did this, I believe it was in 2009, based on guidance from prior DCA legal counsel, the CBA used a pretty similar process as the reinstatement process that we use for the disciplinary cases. Except for that particular matter, the CBA heard the petition itself without an administrative law judge, and DCA legal counsel prepared the decision. In consultation with current DCA legal counsel, we've been provided new guidance as the process regarding to the reinstatement petition process for voluntarily surrendered licenses. Council has advised that the reinstatement process for these types of licenses should have the same structure as a traditional petition for reinstatement. This would include having an administrative law judge preside over the matter and prepare a written decision. Staff will continue to work with council to make any changes or adjustments to the procedures in the future to accept a request to surrender and to process a petition for reinstatement. Staff will bring back options for CBA consideration at a future meeting, which may include exploring a delegation to the executive officer's authority to render a decision to grant a petition for reinstatement, or potentially other regulatory changes that the board may wish to have implemented. So at this particular time, I'd like to turn back discussion over to President Burhow, and I'd be happy to answer any questions members may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any questions or comments from the board? Mr. Campos?
I don't get it.
Oh.
Why do we need an administrative law judge to preside over something where the individual had no discipline, is looking for reinstatement, I don't get why we need to go through a process that involves an ALJ.
My question dovetails right with his, and my only further comment was rather than DCA legal counsel. I mean, if we got to go this route, why are we pulling in an administrative law judge? Why can't DCA legal counsel?
Okay, so you only have one statute for reinstatements, and it does not distinguish between reinstatements for a voluntary surrender versus reinstatements that were surrendered in lieu of discipline. There is no distinction in the statute between those types of processes. So you might want to, in the future, pursue a legislative amendment if you want to make a distinction between the two. Secondly, it is an evidentiary hearing. The difference is the focus would be not on what they rehabilitated from past discipline, but whether they're still currently competent to step back into practice, and whether they what they have done since they've been out of practice, so that you're confident that if you reinstate the license, that they can practice competently. So you wouldn't be focusing on misconduct, but rather educational competence. Also, whether they've had any criminal convictions since they've surrendered their license or had anything else that would affect their practice. So that would be the focus of the questioning, and the burden of proof would be different. Burden of proof for someone with a disciplinary record is clear and convincing evidence. When somebody who has no discipline reinstates, it would be preponderance. It would be a lower standard of proof. So those are the distinctions, but they are both evidentiary hearings that are, usually administrative law judges conduct those hearings because that's their job, is to weigh evidence, take information and questions, and rule on admissibility of evidence. So since that's within the scope of their job and not mine, that's typically why ALJs do those hearings.
Mr. Cpas.
We clearly have more information on someone who previously surrendered a license and is looking to be reinstated than we do for a new applicant that, we clearly don't go through. We go through an application process, but it doesn't involve an evidentiary gathering. I hear your point on one reinstatement aspect. What is the provision now for retirees who wish to come active again? I seem to remember that when we implemented all that. Is it the same reinstatement provision that they would have to go through, or is there a different avenue?
Yeah.
And that was my question, too.
And is the different avenue involve an ALJ situation?
No. So for both retired and individuals who are converting from inactive to active status, especially for those who are doing it outside of the standard renewal period, where they might renew in January 31st normally, but they need their license and it's in June, that kind of thing. The reinstatement process is done through what's called status conversion, where there's a specified amount of CE that they would need to complete for a 2-year period. And it's pretty similar to the CE requirements that exist for regular renewal. So a retired person would just have to complete the CE and go back through it again. They have a bit of a limitation. They can only go into retired status, I think, twice, so they can't continue to use it as a ins and out kind of thing, but an inactive person. The other version that also is kind of similar to those are individuals who have a canceled license after 5 years of non-renewal. Their license is by operation of law canceled. Rather than go through the entire application process documenting all the certificate of experience and exam grades and all the things that go into that, we already have all of that information. The board has established a process whereby they don't get their license reinstated, they get a whole new license, but it's just CE based. It's a CE based kind of reapplication process. They submit an application, they complete certain CE, and that kind of satisfies the requirements to get back in.
And that gets handled within the staff
Yeah.
department.
So I'm thinking that this inactivity may have taken place predominantly before we had the retired status.
Right.
Therefore, there should be one free get out of jail free card by going to those people and saying, if you convert to retired status from inactive within a period of time, it's an easier process to get back in.
Well, the whole idea of not being delinquent, right, and having that connotation, you have an easier path to reinstatement than you do if you surrendered and anyways.
Well, anyway, so the problem is that 5070.1, which is the statute for retired status, was enacted after your 5115 petition for voluntary surrenders statute.
Which
So
I realized.
you might want to look to modify it so that it's a similar type of restoration process.
Yeah, I just,
How many surrender, how many licensees do you have that are in this surrender status?
One time.
Just about 110 that we were able to identify. The other option the board can consider, and like I said, we'll be bringing forth this was really just to give some information on this particular topic. We're going to be bringing back a future agenda item that the board can kind of digest as to some of the other options. But one of the options is the usefulness of voluntarily surrendered licenses at this particular point, because again, the impetus primarily and originally was because we didn't have a retired status whereby individuals could not feel this negative connotation associated with their license as canceled or delinquent and expired. And those were the primary people who were using it. I don't think, by no means is it exclusive, but it was the lion's share. There could be some value in the board discussing whether or not there's really a lot of value in accepting surrenders in this kind of environment as well. So we can bring that as part of any paper.
But it seems like we still would have to deal with the legislative authority. I mean, I think we're unfortunately in this kind of tricky place where our intention may be to, facilitate something that may not happen with this 110 people, but it's not legislatively, we don't have the authority to do that. And it doesn't necessarily take into consideration the, taking care of the consumer public. So I just am hesitant for us to advise staff to do something which, in the end may create an additional problem. If it's 110 people that are kind of in this, this tricky limbo, it might be better to advise them that, you have surrendered license, please be aware that, it happened at a certain period of time, but you could convert to the retired status if you were intending to come back into the practice, as opposed to us going through the process of trying to gain the legislative authority to be able to capture these people, because then we have to go back through the process again of, making sure that we're taking care of the public's interest and, what have you.
And we can definitely explore that. I think the primary hurdle is they don't have a license. They don't have any opportunity to kind of change their license status anymore.
So they can't change from surrendered to retired.
No. Once you've surrendered your license, it's the same as me. I don't have a license and I have no authority to do anything above and beyond.
But apparently it's not the same as a canceled license.
No,
Sure.
but there are, so the legislature and the
Get it.
board have set up
The statute.
set up rules and regulations based on the various nature in which you may have surrendered, canceled, been in a particular status. And so there's very regimented rules, but an individual who surrendered their license has no license. So they have no authority to make a change to it.
You mentioned the age of the 110, but you didn't give us a picture of what their age is, like.
I don't know their age. I know that primarily when I first started with the board, this was shortly after this was kind of being used. The majority of the phone calls and the people who were using it were individuals who were set to retire. And so this existed pre the current retirement statute. So it was a vehicle for them to feel a little bit better about how they were going to display on the website. But again, I don't believe it's exclusively been used by individuals who are retiring or who were of a retirement age. So I can't give you any specifics on that. But it is a group of individuals that the board has. It is a group of individuals that could continue to grow. And so that's why we've kind of brought this forward and want to give the board an opportunity at a future meeting to kind of digest what a good option is, whether or not it's legislative, regulatory, whatever that may be.
Well, I'm certainly not interested in a legislative process for about 100 people that are out there on this. There seems to be some level of interpretive stuff here that, because we went down a path where we didn't do an ALJ process, which seems like a waste of resources in my mind, to go down that path. And so I hear the pickle we're in, but you compare it to the other aspects of retirees and canceled licensees, and it just looks odd. You know, so, but I certainly am not interested in some effort to try to go figure out legislative changes to make this small population work in a different way.
Ms. Wright?
Would this group of people include those who have relocated to another state and effectively transferred their license to that state and no longer need to be licensed in California?
Presumably it could. It depends on what that state requires. I know some states, or at least it used to be, I don't know under the new mobility provisions statewide, but your license was predicated on your other state. And so, but I wouldn't be surprised if some had used this, had a reciprocal license, moved to that state, and were able to surrender this license so they could go there.
Okay. All right. For another topic, thank you very much, Mr. Frinzella. All right, moving on to item 5, report on the Enforcement Advisory Committee, Qualifications Committee, and Peer Review Oversight Committee. We're going to start with item A, Enforcement Advisory Committee. Hello, Mr. Rosenbaum. Thank you for coming.
Hello, good afternoon. I've got 2 reports to present. The first one is an overview of the Enforcement Advisory Committee's purpose, function, and role, and the second is a report on the activities at our most recent February 2nd meeting. The EAC assists the CBA in its enforcement activities and consumer protection mandate by providing technical expertise, advice, and assistance related to the CBA's investigatory functions. Specifically, the EAC acts as an advisory committee and assists the CAB in its enforcement activities in 3 different areas. First, by participating in investigative hearings. Second, by assisting in open investigations on a technical aspect as needed. And thirdly, reviewing closed cases to ensure that that the work was done to our satisfaction, and we would agree on that. In terms of the investigative hearings are used to gather additional evidence to help clarify facts and circumstances of a complaint and or to provide the licensee with the opportunity to present his or her position on matters under investigation. In fiscal year 2015-2016, the EAC conducted a total of 22 investigative hearings. Providing assistance on open investigations, we review open investigation case files and provide the CBA staff the opportunity to seek our advice and technical expertise on competency and quality issues related to accountancy and tax matters. Also in fiscal year 2015 and through 2016, we provided technical guidance on 14 open investigations. When we review closed cases at our regularly scheduled meetings, the information is used to improve the quality of CBA's investigative procedures, and in 2015-2016 we reviewed 130 closed cases. The EAC committee is comprised of 13 licensees, all of whom must be California licensed CPAs in good standing. We currently have 11 positions occupied. 2 positions are open and vacant. We meet approximately 4 times a year, generally one-day meetings. They rotate between Northern and Southern California, depending on where the, most likely depending on where the investigative hearings need to be held. So at this point, I'll see if you have any further questions regarding the purpose or function.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the board or comments? So I had a quick question, so I was asking Mr. Savoy. So right now, when you say the EAC is comprised of 13 licensees and you've got 11 members, so Mr. Savoy was able to get a few people appointed, so does that mean it's full, or do we still have 2 vacancies?
1 vacancy.
We have 1 vacancy left. Okay. Any other questions besides me? All right. Any questions from the public? Thank you very much. That was a lovely report.
Okay. And now, for a short report on our most recent meeting on February 2nd, 2017. First, we would like to thank Ms. Salazar for attending our meeting and providing some information from the last CBA meeting. At our meeting, we reviewed and provided guidance on 1 open case and 16 closed cases, and we held 3 investigative hearings. Our next meeting will be on May 4th, 2017 in Burbank. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions from the board? Any public comment? All right, with that, thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, moving on to item B, Qualifications Committee. If we can welcome back Mr. Evans.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam President and members of the board. I am David Evans, and I am chair of the Qualifications Committee, and I'm pleased to be here with you today. And I'm going to provide a short overview of the purpose and function and role of the committee. First, I would like to thank the board for appointing 2 new members to the committee. The committee is comprised of 13 licensees, all of whom must be in good standing. Today's appointments bring the number of occupied positions to 11 with 2 vacant positions. The committee acts in its advisory capacity to assist the CBA in its licensure activities and consumer protection mandate by examining the qualifications of applicants for certified public accountant licensure and making recommendations to the CBA. These activities include 1, conducting work paper reviews of experience of applicants appearing before the QC under the provisions of the CBA regulations sections 12 and 12.5, the general and attest experience requirements. The selection process for applicants to appear before the QC is determined on a case-by-case basis. However, applicants who are applying for licensure with attest experience obtained outside of the United States and its territories must appear before the committee. 2, interviewing employers that appear before the QC under the provisions of CBA Regulation Section 69, also referred as a Section 69 review. The selection process for Section 69 reviews is also determined on a case-by-case basis. Some of the examples of circumstances which an employer may be selected to appear before the committee include 1, the applicant has a family relationship with the employer. 2, the firm is on reappearance status due to a prior unsatisfactory Section 69 review. 3, an unduly short period of experience results in an affirmatively completed experience form. 4, there is an alleged disagreement between the applicant and employer regarding the dates and or type of the work performed. 5, the employer has failed or refused to complete an experience form. And 6, lastly, the CBA believes the information on the experience form is false or incorrect. Lastly, the third activity that the committee is involved in is in making recommendations and forwarding reports to the board here for action on any matter which it is authorized to act. Each year, the committee conducts a review of a sampling of all approved licensure files that were approved by staff. In fiscal year 15-16, our committee reviewed 100 approved license files and concurred with staff's determination on all 100. Our committee was recently assigned to discuss whether revisions are needed to the current Certificate of Attest Experience form due to the changes regarding preparation engagements no longer being considered an attest function. Our committee will initiate its discussion on this topic at its meeting next month. The QC meets approximately 4 times annually, rotating between Northern and Southern California, generally for 1 day each meeting. Our meetings typically consist of an open session business meeting, followed by a closed session comprised of 2 to 3 person subcommittees to conduct the personal appearances and 69 reviews. Prior to concluding the closed session, the subcommittee's recommendations regarding the personal appearances and Section 69 reviews are presented before the full committee for acceptance prior to being presented for action by the licensing division. A subcommittee comprised of 2 qualification committee members may conduct additional personal appearances and Section 69 reviews between our meetings, which we refer to as off-cycle reviews. Off-cycle subcommittee recommendations are presented before the full Qualifications Committee for acceptance during closed session at its regularly next scheduled meeting. In fiscal year 15-16, our committee conducted a total of 7 personal appearances and 49 Section 69 reviews. Of those, 37 were approved and 14 were deferred. At this time, I'll turn the time back over to you, Madam President, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any comments or questions from the board?
I just have one question.
Yes, sir.
You talk about qualifications of people coming into the profession. If somebody has a G license and now wants to get an A license, does those matters still come before you as well?
You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, Renee. Those applicants apply for their test experience certification, so to speak. And I don't know that those always come for review before our committee. I think they're handled like other regular licensures, aren't they?
Right. So when an applicant or when a licensee with general authority does submit their conversion request, those situations are reviewed case by case, just as an initial applicant.
Okay. But I mean, they've already been admitted as a CPA.
Right, but if there is question with respect to that specific attest experience, whether the minimum qualifications were met, then that person may be requested to appear.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Any comments from the public? Okay, with that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item C, the Peer Review Oversight Committee. Mr. DeLizer, and congratulations on your reappointment.
And I have several items, so go ahead and get used to me.
So, lucky us.
I'll begin item 5C1. The Peer Review Oversight Committee is an overview of their purpose, function, and role. And throughout all of this, I'm going to refer to the Peer Review Oversight Committee as either the PROC or the committee because it's too long to say. The materials you provide a comprehensive overview, and I'll just touch on a few of the highlights. The definition was great in there. The PROC assists the CBA in its oversight of the peer review program and its consumer protection mandate by ensuring that board-recognized peer review program providers administer peer review in accordance with CBA standards. Additionally, the PROC assists the CBA in an advisory capacity by making various recommendations. More specifically, the PROC's activities and responsibilities include holding meetings as necessary to review and report to the CBA regarding the effectiveness of mandatory peer review, and conducting oversight activities to ensure that board-recognized peer review program providers administer peer reviews in accordance with the standards set forth by CBA regulations. These oversight activities include conducting an annual administrative site visit at the California Society of CPAs, attending AICPA peer review board meetings and CalCPA committee meetings as needed to evaluate the effectiveness of the program, attending meetings conducted for the purpose of accepting peer review reports to evaluate and assess the effectiveness of that part of the peer review process, conducting reviews of peer review reports on a sample basis that's typically conducted during that administrative site visit at CalCPA's office, and attending peer reviewer training courses. To summarize these activities that are conducted throughout the year, the PROC also prepares an annual report to the CBA, and that is one of my subsequent agenda items. And then recently, there's been a new role and activity assigned by the CBA to the PROC, and that is evaluating the peer reviewer population, and we look forward to reporting more on that in future meetings. The PROC is comprised of 7 licensees, and thank you to the reappointment today, we are fully seated. However, we do have a number of retirements coming up this year. They're appointed by the CBA to serve 2-year terms with a maximum of 4 consecutive terms allowed. The PROC meets approximately 4 times annually, rotating between Northern and Southern California, and the PROC meetings are conducted as open session. This time I'll turn it back over to you, President Verhoeven, for any questions.
Is there any questions for Mr. DeLizer? Are there any questions from the public? All right, carry on.
Moving forward to item 5C2, an overview of our February 3rd meeting. We held a meeting on February 3rd in Sacramento at the CBA's office, hopefully for the last time. We're looking forward to the new office.
He says that with love.
The members reported on and discussed various oversight activities that took place between our last meeting, which was December 9th, and our February 3rd meeting. The PROC also completed its work on the 2016 annual report, which I'll touch on in my next item. We also spent some time discussing the AICPA's January release of a paper entitled The Proposed Evolution of Peer Review Administration, which was a revision of prior white paper, and I'll present on this later in my report as well. Our next meeting will be held May 5th in Burbank. That's all I have for that meeting, if there's any questions.
Any questions or comments? Any comments from the Republic? The Republic? The public. Yeah, I need some coffee. All right, thank you.
Next item, 5C3, the presentation of our 2016 Peer Review Oversight Committee Annual Report. At this time, I'd like to thank my fellow PROC members and members of the CBA staff. Without all of that concerted effort, this annual report is difficult to put forth for sure. And I'd also like to thank our prior chair, who was recognized earlier in the meeting, Bob Lee, who, with his 2 years of leadership on the committee, and he is due to retire also from the PROC later this year. The annual report includes information on various activities and accomplishments, information on the oversight functions performed by the PROC, and various statistical information covering peer reviews administered by the California Society of CPAs over the past 4 years. It was a busy year for the PROC. We undertook several important initiatives which are highlighted in the report. These include evaluating and refining the administrative site visit process that's used for the oversight of the California Society of CPAs, evaluating our various oversight checklists to ensure their continued completeness and relevance, and developing a process to routinely review the AICPA and NASBA websites for important peer review related notices so that we can keep our committee as well as the CBA up to date and informed on these issues. In 2017, we will begin our process to develop a framework to evaluate the peer reviewer population, which is that new responsibility that the CBA has added to the PROC. We look forward to reporting on our progress for that in a future meeting. Based on our oversight activities, the PROC concluded that the AICPA peer review program, including the administering entities for California peer reviews, function effectively in accordance with the standards adopted by the CBA. And our committee is requesting that the CBA adopt the 2016 annual report and continue to provide continued guidance to the PROC concerning oversight activities. This I'll turn back over to you, President.
Okay. Do you have any questions from the board? And do we need to take a motion?
I would move approval of the peer review oversight committee annual report as presented.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, was that you, Mr. Famelot? Okay. So we have first from Mr. Campos and a second from Mr. Famelot. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment or any questions? Any questions from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for a vote.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Jin Oyang?
Yes.
Sunny Youngsung Park?
Yes.
Deidre Robinson?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
And Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
George Famelet?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
And Alicia Burhow.
Yes. Good. All right, with that, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
I'm still here.
I know you are.
One more.
Keep going. Keep going.
Item 5C4, a discussion of the AICPA's January 2017 Peer Review Administration White Paper. As members may recall, last year the AICPA released 2 papers related to proposed changes to its administration of peer review. In both papers, the AICPA was considering a significant reduction in the number of administering entities. Specifically, the AICPA was considering reducing the number from its present 43 to between 8 and 10, which with each of those administering entities being required to administer a minimum of 1,000 peer reviews annually. The purpose of these proposed changes was to increase the quality, the consistency, efficiency, and effectiveness of the administration of the peer review process. In August of last year, the PROC reviewed the 2 initial papers and heard from representatives from the California Society of CPAs, which is the administering entity for California. They indicated that they would continue to operate as the administering entity in California even under the new proposed changes. CalCPA administers over 1,000 peer reviews in California alone, and also administers peer reviews for Arizona and Alaska. Given this confirmation from CalCPA, at the CBA meeting in September of 2016, the PROC recommended that the CBA support those efforts being undertaken by the AICPA to enhance the effectiveness, consistency, and quality of peer reviews. And a letter to that effect was submitted by the CPA to the AICPA, and it is attachment 2 to this item in your materials. In January, the AICPA issued a revised paper. As noted in the AICPA's revised paper, based on feedback it received, it was no longer seeking to reduce the number of administering entities or have a minimum annual peer review administering requirement. The revised model would require administering entities to meet specific benchmarks and increase the transparency of the administering entity's performance. The new model also includes a fair procedures process for those entities that might fail to meet the benchmarks. The PROC discussed the revised paper at its meeting in February, and at that time, the PROC determined that the proposed changes would not impact the CBA's ability to oversight the AICPA peer review program, and so no further action or comment was necessary from the board at that time. Subsequent to our February meeting, the information was received regarding feedback and concerns voiced by NASBA and other state boards of accountancy. This information has been provided in your red folders as supplemental information. The concerns include a potential lack of transparency and concerns over the costs associated with obtaining the peer review, particularly how those costs may impact small firms. This topic, particularly the NASBA response, will be included in the agenda of the PROC at its May 5th meeting, and will be brought back for discussion in the May CBA meeting. The deadline for a comment letter on that report is June 30th of 2017. This time I'll turn it back over to you, President Burhout.
All right. Are there any questions or comments from the board? And do we need to, and we'll have to be on anything with the comment letter yet? Okay. Okay. Are there any questions from the public? Okay, with that, I think, yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. All right, moving forward, item number 6, report of the enforcement chief, Dominic Franzella. Welcome back again. You're everywhere today.
So thank you. Item 6A is the enforcement activity report as of June 31st, 2017, so it's 7 months of data. I'll just highlight a couple of things and then turn it back over to President Burhout to answer any questions members may have. The complaints, over the past 2 months, we've received another 550 complaints. Right now, we're on pace for just a little bit more than last year's. I think we're close to about 2,900 complaints that we're anticipating or projecting at this particular point. So we're keeping a tab on that. I just want to keep members informed. Moving on to page 2 in investigations. So far this year, we've assigned just over 1,300 investigations. One thing I'd like to point out is we've assigned 1,300, but we've managed to close 1,400, so we're staying at least a little bit ahead of the inventory that we're getting. And our average days to close is continuing to be below prior years, so we're excited about that. Obviously, we have a volume of cases over 24 months, and we have a bubble right behind it, things that we're very much aware of and working hard to clear up. And so I think since the last report, we closed 8 but got 10, so it increased the number a little bit. And for this fiscal year, we have closed 46 cases over 24 months, so staff are working hard to try to get that number and that inventory down. So moving on to page 3, this year we've referred so far 42 cases over to the AG's office. I believe that number is going to go up quite a bit over the next by the next report, as well as the number of accusations filed. I think there was a flood of accusations that were coming to the office recently. But so far we've done 51 this year, and for closed session, the board has adopted 55 decisions and has a large volume again for this meeting. As you can see, our inventory of pending discipline at the AG's office, we've worked really hard with the AG's office with Carl's assistance to keep that number manageable. I think we're down to, it says 99, so that's a pretty good number for us, considering how many cases we've referred over to the AG's office over the last 2 years. 7 cases there are over 24 months. 1 has been on your report since the beginning of time, it looks like. And we monitor it, but we haven't heard as to when that may be finalized. We have 2 cases that'll take effect at the end of this month, and a hearing that's scheduled for, that took place last month. So that really only leaves about 3 cases of those 7 that we're still working on. Probation monitoring activities, as members can see, that number is continuing to grow and grow. We went from 120 at the last report to another 131 for this report, and that number continues to go up. We're doing our best to stay on top of that in terms of getting them through probation orientation and meeting with them so that they are as successful as possible during the probationary period. Lastly, you have the mobility statistics. The SEC and PCOB identified discipline are the requirements that we have in the mobility bill to go and check the SEC and PCOB's website for anybody who may not be authorized to practice, and we notify them of that information. And we're required to do it every 6 months. And we've kind of implemented a procedure to try to get that done more than that, since we're on the SEC and PCOB website a little bit more frequently, and trying to not just wait around until January and July to do it. So lastly, on the final page of page 6, I've just highlighted our vacancies as they stand right now. As was reported in the budget report, we are, I believe, 9 positions or 7 positions are going to be eliminated from the Enforcement Division for the core unit effective June 30th, but they're vacant as of now because there's no real reason to try to recruit and fill for a couple of months. So with that, I'll turn it back over to President Berhow, and I'd be happy to answer any questions members may have.
Okay, so any comments or questions from the board? Ms. Wright?
Dominic, on the first page under complaints, and I'm not sure if there should be a correlation here or not, but on the 3rd bullet point, you say that top external complaint are tax-related matters, but in the pink sheets, at least for this time around, I didn't see.
We can't talk, I'm sorry, we cannot discuss what's in the pink sheets in a public board meeting, just a reminder to the board members.
Okay, maybe I can rephrase the question.
Please.
With respect to complaints, are most of them settled outside of the scope of what we would see here? Did that do?
No, every matter that leads towards a settlement would come before the board. We may investigate a particular case and decide with Patty not to prosecute the particular case, or there was insufficient evidence to prosecute, or the complaint may no longer wish to be cooperative, which could limit and hamper our ability to effectively bring forth discipline. So there's a whole host of reasons why particular cases may not come before the board, but any matter that would lead towards an individual being placed on some type of disciplinary action would always come before the board.
So there's real no correlation then between the nature of complaints that you receive and what comes before the board?
No, not really. I mean, not that I've seen. As you can see, the majority of our complaints are internal, either through SEC or PCOB type of things, peer review, educational deficiencies, renewal-related deficiencies, and things of that nature. So,
Mr. Silverman?
There's no trend of particular problems in the tax area that you're seeing?
Nothing that jumps to mind. Nothing that I've seen that really sticks out that this one particular area stands out more than anything else.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Silverman.
Okay. Mr. Franzella, on page 4 under citations and fines, it looks like we're running at a lower rate for the 7 months than we had in previous years. Has there been any change in policy?
Not policy as much as just effective communication. We've modified our internal practices within the kind of complaint intake portion of enforcement to get information out via email, phone calls, and initial contact letters. That way, when there's that potential that this case could lead towards a citation or fine, that there's a chance to work with the licensee per the board's request to get these matters remedied. So I think we just have better communication now with our licensees. Primarily, this 89, that number has been increasing the last couple of meetings. I think when we first started, it hovered around like 30. It's gotten a little bit more lately because we're still seeing the high volume of 20 and 12, the annual CE requirement, and that's a non-correctable mistake. I mean, once you've done it, and we can't correct that. But for all the other stuff, shortage of ethics, maybe forgetting the renewal form or forgetting the peer review form, we do our best to get that complied with so we no longer issue citations as frequently as we had historically.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions from the board? Any comments from the public? Okay, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 7, Ms. Daniel.
Pardon while I set up my nameplate.
No problem.
Good afternoon. This item covers 3 fiscal years of statistical data for the licensing division. Page 1 identifies the volume of contact each unit within the division has with our applicants and licensees. Although call stats remain unavailable at this time, the division continues to experience an increase in calls and emails received. This is due to a continued increase in applicant inquiries regarding the new version of the Uniform CPA examination, which will take effect April 1st, as well as status inquiries regarding processing timeframes for pending applications on file, which I will touch on in a moment. Pages 2 through 5 cover the highlights and statistics for the examination and initial licensing unit. At the last meeting, I identified that there were 5 vacancies in this unit, and today I'm pleased to report that we have filled 4 of those 5 vacant positions. Training for the new staff members is well underway, and we're currently recruiting for 1 associate governmental program analyst position, which we hope to have filled very soon. The report shows fiscal year-to-date processing timeframes as of January 31st. First-time applications for the Uniform CPA examination are being processed within 35 days, and repeat applications within 8 days. These timeframes are an improvement from my last report. Although the unit's processing timeframe for initial CPA licensure applications for the month of February was at 42 days, the fiscal year-to-date average processing timeframe is at 31 days. The unit continues to work diligently to process the increased volume of applications received due to the recent changes in the ethics study educational requirement, which took effect January 1st of this year. We anticipate that the newly hired resources will also assist us in bringing the unit back to its target processing timeframe of 30 days. On page 4, you may notice that we've added some statistical information to this report regarding conversion requests. These are requests from licensees with general experience who have now completed the attest experience requirement and wish to convert their license. Pages 6 through 8 cover the statistics for the license, renewal, and continuing competency unit. And it begins with our total licensee population, which is reflected in the graph for the prior 3 fiscal years. The unit is currently recruiting to fill 1 vacant staff services analyst position, and the unit is in the initial stages of revising the CPA renewal application as it pertains to the proposed preparation engagement CE requirement. That concludes my report for this item. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Oh, sorry, Deanne, or Deanne at this point.
I just want to extend my appreciation to Veronica. She's been serving as the acting licensing chief since, I think, early September, while Gina Sanchez was out on maternity leave. And Gina just returned last week to the office. But Veronica, you've done an outstanding job, sometimes serving 2 roles, managing the licensing unit and serving as the licensing chief. And things have really just stayed on course, and I just appreciate your dedication to the board and to the licensing division, so thank you.
You have been the multitasker since the day I met you, so so well done you.
Nice job.
Thank you. So are there any comments from the public? Okay, we'll go on to item item B, excuse me.
Yes. So this item is to provide the CBA with an overview of the focus areas which staff has identified for additional outreach opportunities as a result of stakeholder comments received as part of the study on California's attest experience requirement, or attest study. No action is required on this item. The attest study was conducted to gather feedback regarding whether the present 500-hour attest experience requirement for CPA licensure is necessary and sufficient to support the CBA's mission to protect consumers. As a result of the 2-year study, the CBA concluded that the 500-hour attest experience requirement was sufficient. Additionally, as part of the outcome of the study, the CBA concurred that it would increase outreach efforts to educate stakeholders regarding the difference between CPA licensure obtained with general versus attest experience. The attest study also allowed an opportunity for additional open-ended comments regarding the attest experience requirement. A total of 5,417 comments were received, ranging from a single word to several paragraphs. As recommended by CBA member Jose Campos and CPS HR, who were the consultants of the study, staff performed an extensive review of these written comments, and it was evident that although voluminous, the written comments included significant amount of potentially valuable feedback. Staff was able to narrow down a dozen or so common themes to the following 3 focus areas for future outreach. First, confusion regarding general versus attest licensure. That was probably the number 1 of the open-ended comments that we received. 2, issues with obtaining attest experience. And 3, confusion regarding continuing education and or renewal requirements. These focus areas will be included in the CBA's communication and outreach plan. Staff will be developing messages to stakeholders, target timeframes for messaging, and best method for communication, such as the CBA website, as well as our various social media outlets and partnerships with our outside organizations. We certainly welcome any other recommendations CBA members may have regarding this topic. And that concludes my presentation for this.
This confusion is at the licensee level, not the confusion that the public has of not knowing a difference between a G and an A.
So part of the stakeholder groups that were identified for this study, a portion were consumers. So there were some open-ended comments from consumers that were to this effect. I don't have the detailed specifics on that information, but there were also some comments from licensees with questions with respect to what is required for each of the respective authorities.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Any comments from the public? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 8. Now we're moving into committee reports. And we're going to go ahead and start with the Committee on Professional Conduct. Mr. Famila.
Okay, since May 15th, the CBA has been very active in discussions, in changes in various regulations, specifically dealing with sections 88, 88.1, 88.2, and section 89, which in general deal with defining nano-learning, provider requirements, and the blending of trainings with nano requirements and traditional measurements. The CPC recommends that the CBA approve the proposed regulatory text provided and direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. Next item. At the January meeting, the CPC requested the topic concerning protected electronically collected or transmitted client information be placed on a future agenda. Staff reported that both the Business and Professional Code 5063 and CBA Regulation 54.1 contain provisions that no confidential information obtained by a licensee shall be disclosed without written permission of the client or prospective clients, except under specific exceptions which are detailed in both statute and regulation. This was an informational item, and no action was taken by the CPC. Last item, item A4, was the discussion of the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy's exposure draft regarding model rules for continuing professional education. Staff presented the proposed changes to the model rules for continuing professional education. The changes were more detailed than past editions and clearly identified minimum annual CE requirements, as well as 2 new delivery methods, nano and blended learning. There were 5 relevant rules which were changed. The CPC at this time did not take any action on any of the suggested changes. That concludes my comments.
Those are the comments. Okay. So before we move forward, okay, I think we need to have a recusal.
You want me to leave now? Okay. I've been asked to recuse myself. I don't agree, but I will leave.
We'll
Just
come get
on
you.
item 8A2.
All right. So, yeah, so we're on item item 8.2. Okay, so a potential motion on the table that we need to put forward? Okay. Sorry, and I was like,
What's the item number?
yeah, I know.
8A2.
8A2.
Okay, so the recommendation, sorry. All right, so the recommendation is, so the recommendation is coming from the CPC committee.
Correct.
Mr. Trammell, could you repeat the recommendation from the committee?
You wanted to?
Just repeat
The
the.
rulemaking.
Yes.
Okay. The CPC recommends that the CBA approve the proposed regulatory text in CCR sections 88, 88.1, 88.2, and 89, and direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs for review. And if they have no adverse comments or receives, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process and make any changes to the package and set the matter for hearing.
Yes.
Just for clarification, so I know it's a long-winded motion, you're
Yes.
like, what does that mean? Years ago, the Office of Administrative Law, which is the agency responsible for reviewing all of your proposed regulatory changes, required us to provide explicit instruction from the rulemaking body, which is you, to the staff regarding what you've delegated them to do and what you've authorized or approved as text. And so that's why this long, clunky motion is in place. But essentially, in the packet, you have proposed text and underline and strikeout that shows amendments and deletions to the existing regulation. And the committee looked at it, and this was their recommendation to approve the proposal that you have in 8A2 in the packet. So just for the newer members, just so she understands that why we're doing this. Thank you.
All right, so this is a fully formed motion. We don't need a first or a second. It's already done. So is there any discussion? Or questions? Oh, sorry, yes, Ms. Salazar.
The one thing that I would point out is that when I listened to the committee's dialogue, there was a lot of discussion about the 2 credit hours of ethics. This is the same issue, correct? I would just point out my interpretation is I don't see an implementation problem, because if you read the rules, it's an average of 2 credits in each year. So it seems that you could have 0 in one and 4 in the other, and it would still average 2.
I think that was the revised NASBA,
Yes.
paper, not related to the regulatory text.
Okay, thank you for clarifying, because that in the committee had me confused.
Yeah, it's part of this exposure draft that I think NASBA's put out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Is there any other questions or comments from the board? Are there any comments from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Family.
Yes.
Soshi Leon.
Yes.
Jen Oying.
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park.
Yes.
And Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Okay, if you could just wait a second.
We'll look real quick. So with that, the motion passes. Okay, we're going to wait 1 second, and then we'll go on to item 3.
Didn't he already cover items 3 and 4?
Oh, wait, 3 and 4. Yes, he did.
He
Sorry.
kind of went through all of
Yes.
them, right, George? You completed
Yeah.
your...
Right,
Yep.
but discussion
There was
and
no
discussion.
action.
So discussion, no action, so he should be good to go?
Anyone that might want to comment on 2, 3, and 4?
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, so is there any further discussions on items 3 and 4? Is that right? Okay.
3 and 4, yes.
Any board member comments or questions? Any comments from the public? Fantastic. All right, so thank you very much, Mr. Fenlon. Okay, moving on to item B, the Legislative Committee with Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Thank you. On item, so the Legislative Committee met this morning, and this will be a report upon our work. On item 8B2A, an update on previously approved legislative proposals. The staff reviewed the previously CBA-approved proposals to amend Business and Professions Code sections 5094D and 5063.3A4. Staff submitted both proposals to the Senate Business, Profession, and Economic Development Committee, and both will be included in their omnibus bill. There is no bill number at this time, as committee bills do not need to be introduced as quickly as regular bills and work along a different timeline. Staff will keep in contact with Senate committee staff as this bill works through the process. The Legislative Committee did not take any action on this bill. Item number 8B2B, AB 349, Department of Consumer Affairs applicants for licensure, special immigrant visas. Assembly Bill 349 was amended since the mail-out. Staff reported that the amended version provides anyone with a special immigrant visa extra points when taking a civil service exam in the pursuit of employment with the state of California. The Legislative Committee did not take any action on this bill. Item number 8B2C, AB 703, Professions and Vocations Licenses Fee Waiver. Assembly Bill 703 would require every board within DCA to grant a fee waiver for the application and issuance of an initial license for an applicant who is married to or in a domestic partnership or other legal union with an active duty member of the Armed Forces of the United States, if the applicant holds a current license in the same profession in another state. Currently, a board within DCA is required to expedite the licensure process for an applicant who is married to or in any other legal union with an active duty member of the military. According to the author's office, this bill would ease administrative and financial burdens for families moving to California for military duty. During the break, the staff reached out to Senator Morell's office, the author of a similar bill introduced last year, Senate Bill 1155. Staff were informed that SB 1155 was approved unanimously by the Senate and by 2 policy committees in the Assembly, but did not pass the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Although the Legislative Committee did not vote to support this bill, the CBA may take action if they wish at this time. And at this point, should I stop and let us take action on that, or have a discussion on that matter? So, at this time, President, would you?
Okay, so if you could repeat the motion.
Sure.
So that would.
Well, there was no motion.
I mean,
No,
not
there was
the
no
motion,
motion. I'll repeat the bill. So the bill, SB 27,
Yes.
would add a new section to the Business and Professions Code that requires every board within DCA to grant a fee waiver for the application for and the issuance of an initial license to an applicant who is an honorably discharged, oh wait, no, I'm sorry. I'm reading from the wrong place. I'm sorry. It's AB 703. And Assembly Bill 703 will require every board within DCA to grant a fee waiver for the application and issuance of an initial license for an applicant who is married to or in a domestic partnership or other legal union with an active duty member of the Armed Forces of the United States if the applicant holds a current license in the same profession in another state. And the reason why we did not take a position during our legislative committee meeting was because this bill was similar to SB 1155. SB 1155 was not passed by the legislature. And the question was there that we posed to staff was there a reason why SB 1155 did not make it through the legislature? So staff reached out to the author of SB 1155, who provided clarification that there was not some flaw with the bill or some opposition to the bill or something else that made the bill at 1155 to bring up any concern about it. The bill just never was passed. So this bill would do essentially what 1155 did last year. It's just coming back through the legislature again. And so now with this additional information, I would put it to the full board, the CBA, to make a determination as to whether or not they would like to take a position on AB 703 at this time, or whether we just want to leave it and, allow staff to continue to monitor it, or I would leave that to the board.
Okay, we'll go ahead and open it to discussion. Mr. Campos?
I move approval of, or I move to support or adopt a support position on Assembly Bill 703 regarding fee waivers.
I second.
Okay, I think I got first from Mr. Campos. I think she beat you up. I think I got a second from Ms. Salazar. Any comments or discussion, questions? Okay, any comments from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Jen Oyang?
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park?
Yes.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Abstain.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Deidre Robinson?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
And Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Okay, with that, the bill, or the motion passes, so we will support 703. Okay, moving on to number D.
So that item is Assembly Bill 1190, the Department of Consumer Affairs Breeze System Annual Report. AB 1190 would add a section to the Business and Professions Code to require the DCA to submit an annual report to the legislature that includes, among other things, DCA's plans for implementing the third phase of the Breeze system at specified regulatory entities and a timeline for the implementation. The Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA take a support position on Assembly Bill 1190.
Any discussion or questions? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
All right, Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Jen Oyang?
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park?
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Okay, with that, thank you. The motion passes.
Moving right along to item 8B2E, Assembly Bill 1631, Professional Services. AB 1631 would add the definition of professional services contained in the Moscone-Knox Professional Corporation Act to Business Professions Code. The CBA licenses accountancy corporations, and the Moscone-Knox Professional Corporations Act is used as a provision of law relevant to the CBA operations. The Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA take a watch position on Assembly Bill 1631.
Okay. Any comments or questions from the board? Okay.
All right, Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park.
Yes.
Jen Oying.
Yes.
Soshi Leon.
Yes.
Larry Kaplan.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Familet. Jose Campos.
Yes.
And Alicia Burhow.
Yes. With that, the motion passes.
Moving on to item 8B2F, Senate Bill 27, Professions and Vocations Licenses for Military Service. SB 27 would add a new section to Business and Professions Code requiring every board within DCA to grant a fee waiver for the application for and the issuance of an initial license to an applicant who is an honorably discharged veteran. Current law requires each board to inquire in every application if the individual applying for licensure is serving in or has previously served in the military. Additionally, a board is required to expedite and assist the initial licensure process for an applicant who has served in the military. The Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA take a support position on Senate Bill 27 as it is in line with the CBA's positions on previous legislation offering assistance to military personnel and is consistent with the support position the CBA took last year on Senate Bill 1155.
Okay. Any comments or questions? Any comments from the public? Okay, we'll call for the vote.
All right, Larry Kaplan.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Familet.
Yes.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
Kathleen Wright.
Yes?
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park.
Yes.
Jen Oying.
Yes.
And Soshi Leon.
Yes. Okay, with that, the motion passes.
Item 8B2G, Senate Bill 496, Department of Consumer Affairs Regulatory Board's removal of board members. Senate Bill 496 will allow the governor to remove a DCA board member appointed by the governor from their position if they fail to attend board meetings. Under current law, the governor has the power to remove any board member appointed by him or her if that member neglects their duties required by law, is incompetent, or engages in unprofessional conduct. The Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA take a watch position on Senate Bill 496.
Any comment or discussion? I had one question on this, because I was listening to the discussion this morning. Does this also include, so for example, we've had members that have not shown up for meetings when they were appointed by a governor. Does that mean that the current governor could take or ask a previous governor's appointee to resign if they are not attending their meetings?
I don't think it matters which governor appointed
doesn't
you.
matter.
If they're serving currently, they're serving at the pleasure of whatever governor's in office.
I'm just curious.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
They're not showing up, then there you go. Mr. Campos?
Why watch versus support? I mean, it just seems like it's just adding some more framework for, potential removal for something that you serve at the pleasure of the governor's office, and attendance and those kinds of things just seem like rational things that we would expect of a board member. So I probably am more in the camp of support for this bill.
I was the one who raised a question about this bill. It seems redundant because the governor has fairly broad powers to remove members from the board. And so I asked staff for some background as to what precipitated the introduction of this piece of legislation, and there was no information about it. There's just nothing. It's just the bill. So I preferred to take a watch position because I wanted to see I think it would be appropriate to see what happened. It was a recently introduced bill. I didn't feel like there was a need to take an immediate position on it, which is why I recommended a watch position to the committee during our meeting this morning.
Ms. Salazar?
My reaction to this is I would move towards supporting it. I think when I look at our board, I do not see attendance as an issue, and I appreciate that about working with this organization. I don't know that that is always the case in all boards, and so I like strengthening the legal basis for setting board member expectations, just as we have a very robust orientation and training. I don't think this does any harm, and it only benefits the consumers, and for that reason, along with what Jose sort of mentioned, I would voice support for it as well.
Can I entertain a motion?
Well, you have a motion.
Oh, we have a motion, so
So
we have to.
if you agree with it, you should
Okay,
vote
gotcha.
in favor of it. If you want to vote, take another position, you should vote in opposition.
Okay, got it. Okay. So is there any?
The motion is to watch.
Correct. Okay. So is there any other discussion or comment from the board? Questions? Any comment from the public? Okay, that will call for the vote.
Katrina Salazar. Excuse me.
Opposed, no.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Sunny Young-Sun Park.
No.
Jin Oyang.
Yes.
Soshi Leon.
No.
Kathleen Wright.
No.
Mark Silverman.
No.
Larry Kaplan.
No.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Familet.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
No.
And Alicia Burhell.
No. Okay, with that, the motion is not agreed to.
I would move that we adopt a support position on Senate Bill 496.
Okay, is there a second? Who wants to fight for it? All right, I'll let Katrina fight for it. So I'll have Ms. Salazar second. Any discussion, questions? Any comment from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
Alicia Burhell.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
Larry Kaplan.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
No.
George Familet.
No.
Soshi Leon.
Yes.
Jin Oyang.
No.
Sunny Young-Sun Park.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
No.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
It's a vote count? Okay, all right.
Carries.
Okay, the motion carries. Okay, thank you. Let's move on.
Moving on to item number 8B2H, SB 795, Accountancy Practice Privileges. The staff stated that on Tuesday, March 21st, an email was sent to members with a memo from the stakeholders associated with Senate Bill 795. There were inadvertent drafting errors that the sponsors indicated will be corrected as SB 795 moves forward. Additionally, as stakeholders identified in the memo, the primary purpose of the legislation is to repeal the January 1st, 2019 sunset date from the no notice, no fee practice privilege program. The Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA take a watch position on Senate Bill 795.
Any comment or discussion, questions from the board? Mr. Campos?
Yeah, I mean, this one was part of the dialogue this morning as well from an MSG perspective. Wouldn't a position of support, if amended, be a viable option for a bill like this? I mean, there was certainly the idea of repealing or repealing the sunset date was, I think, consistent with where the overall process around mobility is at right now. But would agree that some of the amending of the factors that were outlined would be important. And I think that would send a better message than just a watch position on this one.
I'll wait till members are done. I have a comment.
So I'll just add that we did discuss 795, and the reason for recommending a watch position was after discussion about the errors or the changes that were potentially going to be made to the bill, that we thought it more appropriate to wait to see the changes actually made and what the changes were, because bills can change in any, in any format. So that was why we recommended a watch position. I'll let staff elaborate on it further. So.
Does any other board member have a comment at the moment? Go for it.
So just some advice. I think because you haven't completed the mobility stakeholder group and the board in general hasn't completed its analysis of the viability of the mobility stakeholder group, mobility program, practice privilege program, that it probably would be advisable to weigh in on changes to the law that you're administering until you've done your complete and thorough assessment of that program.
The law provisions would not be impacted by repealing a sunset date. I mean, the factors, what goes into the final report, the things we have to evaluate, the administration of this mobility practice, the oversight of states, none of that changes, but it eliminates a cliff, if you will, from the law, whereby the amount of work that's been done so far is certainly not revealing any issues or problems with the underlying law. And so that was if the heart of the bill, which is what I understood, is to get rid of the sunset date and amend these things that were inadvertent things that happened, then clearly I would support something like that.
I think it pertains specifically to Section 1596.13 and 1596.21A1 and the changes that will need to be made to that portion of the bill. That is a fairly significant change. It potentially could be a fairly significant change, and the manner in which it could be changed could have some impact on the operation of the bill. And if we were to support the bill at this time, it would require our committee it would require it to come back to us to have to then take some affirmative action on the bill, as opposed to if we take a watch position, then staff will continue to monitor it, and they can bring it back to us at the next meeting to ensure that as the legislature is acting expeditiously to move this through the process, and once they have made those amendments, which have been recommended will happen, which they've stated have happened, theoretically they will have happened, and the legislative committee can then at that time look at it and say, these changes have been made, there's no concern about whether or not it impacts the bill inadvertently or in a way that undermines the authority of the CBA or the oversight of the CBA, and there'd be no reason for us not to support the bill as amended.
So I hear both positions. The question I have is maybe directed towards Patty and staff, but I am curious if there's an opinion on whether or not one position over another will send a mixed signal, because what I'm sort of hearing is that there seems to be support, but this isn't in its finalized form. I would be more concerned with putting what could be perceived as an obstruction in a process when we're not trying to maybe do that, we're just biding our time. So are there thoughts about the political impact?
Generally, a watch position puts the author's office on notice that you have some interest, but you're neither opposing or supporting it at this time. You're watching to see what happens. A support or a support with amendment tells the author just that generally you're in support of the bill, and if it's a support with amendments, once those amendments are made to your satisfaction, then it sends the message to the author that you would then be in support of the bill. To the author or anyone else reviewing the analysis once the board takes a position.
But then my question would be, if we give a support with amendment position and an amendment comes back that is, we really don't support, then we have to go through the process of explaining why we like the amendment or why we don't like the amended, withdrawing our support, conditional upon the amendment coming back to us, as opposed to with a watch position, we get the bill back and take a position on a bill in the way that we want to support it, as opposed to us being put in a position where then we have to, revise or give guidance, back to the legislative body as to what our position is. If this was a mere Scrivener mistake, if these were issues that were around just, drafting errors, a comma or an apostrophe or something like that, then that would be one thing. But there is some concern about this in relation to the mobility stakeholder group's work. There is a question about, ensuring that we retain our regulatory oversight and authority. And so that raises it to the level of us being a little bit more conscientious and cautious about the position that we take up on it.
I think my only point on that, though, is any position we take puts it on the radar, and you have to monitor the bill because your position can change. So I don't think it matters from that perspective. We're going to have to monitor it no matter what.
So the reason I'm recommending to wait are for two reasons. First of all, you still have plenty of time to take a position before there's no opportunity to take a position. Secondly, the effect of the repeal in this proposal is that you're saying that you're okay with the mobility or practice privilege program and that it protects consumers adequately, which is the job that the board's supposed to do in reporting back to the legislature and the mobility stakeholder group is doing in analyzing the way the program is working. And so because that report isn't done yet, I think it's premature. That would be my recommendation to you. Of course, you can feel free to reject the advice and do what you think is right.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions? Oh, Ms. Salazar?
If we do a watch, maybe it would be appropriate to have some sort of a letter communication from the president and maybe accompany it.
Say that we like where it's going, kind of
To
thing?
explain that if part of the logic is for a watch, it doesn't infer anything other than we have to complete our duties and look forward to, some communication with the author's office, which would probably happen behind the scenes, but it would be nice to have that formalized.
Do you have something? No? You're good. Ms. Robinson?
I'm just confused. I haven't been on the board that long, but I've never seen or experienced such a robust conversation about a watch. And,
Twice.
And we've done it twice. And although, I appreciate it and I've learned a lot. I appreciate that and that of my board members. I just don't understand why we would have to write a letter. It's just a watch. Help me.
Well, maybe I can add a little context as to why mobility is so unique in California. 55 jurisdictions in the country. I think only one jurisdiction that has not yet adopted mobility, and there's only one jurisdiction that adopted it with a sunset date. So, this is mobility's been adopted sort of carte blanche across the country. We've got some specific regulations, and I appreciate that, and that's the reason we've got an MSG committee that has some very specific actions that we've got to do. And so the concept of waiting to see if something gets approved to get rid of that sunset date on 1/1/19 for a huge amount of, for a big state, right, where a lot of mobility is a big deal. It just seems a little, troubling. And yes, we've got some processes that were laid out, and we're proceeding against those, and we expect to do so. But recognizing how long it takes to get a legislative process done in California is part of the reason that I think the author has put this forward as, let's get that repeal of that sunset date in motion. And yes, there's some accompanying things that we have to do in the meantime.
Beating this horse that I think is dead already. I'm going to kick it some more. But I think that wherever you have a bill, like, as you said, it takes a long time for the legislative process. And when you have a bill that has mistakes in it, I think that's notable because they had plenty of time to bring you a bill that's correct. And like I said, we're not talking about, minor mistakes. If there are some changes in the impact of what our board does, which is protect the public, then I think that is significant enough for us to say, and I think that sends a message to the legislators as well, to do their work and to do their work properly and appropriately, because we're not just going to rubber stamp your work, and we also are not going to, in protecting the public's interest, just say that we trust that you're going to do it the right way. So in this case, it is a bill that is significant. It is a bill that is directly correlates to protecting the public. And so it's not that much of an inconvenience on the legislature for them to hear from us that our expectation is for them to do their job right.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna call this vote. So here, here's the thing, I'm gonna be supporting this because I have been on that end, and I like where the bill's going. I like where the 795 is going, but you're right. I mean, the bill, we could take a support recommended position and then it could completely go south, and then we're stuck. So I hear where you're going. So, but we're gonna go ahead, I'm sorry? Oh, yes. So that was my comment. Are there any comments from the public? Okay, great. So with that, we'll go ahead and call for the vote.
Soshi Leon?
So can we repeat the motion?
Yeah. It's to watch SB.
Watch this
Yes.
bill.
Watch the bill. We're gonna
Deidre
watch.
Robinson?
Absolutely. Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Kathleen Wright?
No.
Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
No.
George Familet?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
No.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
And Sunny Young Sung Park?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Whew, I got one more.
We're not
Testing,
done.
and testing my speaking abilities over here.
do it.
Moving on to the last one. Item 8B2I, other bills being watched by the California Board of Accountancy. Staff stated that the purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CBA with a list of bills which may have potential implications on the CBA. Staff provided a brief overview of the amended version of Senate Bill 247. The Legislative Committee discussed the various aspects of the bill. The Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA take an opposed position on Senate Bill 247.
All right, fun times. So is there any discussion or questions from the board members? No?
Come on!
Lord, baby, it's a miracle. Is there any public comments? Okay, quick, let's call for the vote.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Jen Oyang?
Yes.
Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
No.
George Familet?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Sunny Young Sung Park?
Yes.
And Deirdre Robinson?
Yes.
Okay, with that, the motion passes. Phew. All right. Okay, moving on to item number 3.
Item number 3.
Oh, yeah, the legislative items for future meeting.
No, there are no
Okay.
additional items from the Legislative Committee. That actually concludes my report from the
Well
Legislative.
done. Well done. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, item number C.
Are we going to take a break?
Did you want to? We can. So,
It's, okay.
well, we can take a 10. We can take a quick 5-minute break if people need to stretch their legs.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So let's
Thank
go
you.
ahead and meet back here at 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
We too met this morning. Under item 8C3, we reviewed the timeline for activities regarding determinations to be made pursuant to EPC 5096.21. Staff reported that the timeline was updated to reflect the recent authority the CBA obtained to initiate an emergency rulemaking to remove states from the no notice, no fee practice privilege program. That was really the only modification to the prior timeline that had been approved. But the MSG recommends that with that revision, the CBA adopt the revised timeline.
Okay. Is there any discussion, questions? Is there any comment from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
George Familet?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Jen Oyang?
Yes.
Sunny Young Sung Park?
Yes.
Deidre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
Okay, with that, the motion passes unanimously.
Item C4 was review of the MSG annual report. Staff reported on some of the changes to the November version of the annual report, which included updating various statistics to reflect all activity that occurred through the end of 2016. Now, pages 2 and 3, the background section was enhanced to include additional information regarding SB 1405, which now includes a discussion of the CBA's responsibility to review each state's enforcement practices. In the activities and accomplishments section, beginning on page 7, staff clarified the descriptions of the process to assess each state, including the collaboration between NASBA and CBA staff. And in addition, staff will clarify in the 2017 anticipated topics for discussion that the MSG will issue a final report to the CBA and work with staff to develop a preliminary draft of the CBA's report to the legislature this year. And so with those modifications that are expected in that 2017 anticipated topics section, the MSG recommends that the CBA adopt the 2016 MSG annual report.
All right. Are there any questions or discussion? Okay. Any comments from the public? Okay. With that, we'll call for the vote.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Personally, I couldn't wait for.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Jen Oying,
Yes.
Sunny Young Sung Park,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and George Famlet.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Passes.
Under item C5, it was review and consideration of the current practice privilege program provisions of the Accountancy Act and possible recommendations on whether any legislative changes are necessary. So we basically went through all the SB 795 discussion that we already had a few minutes ago. We went through the memo and the importance of some of the items that had been identified in this memo on clarifying language that would be needed. And to be clear on what those pieces were, one, there were a couple of spots where there were some deletions of authority that were unintentional. And then secondly, having the practice privilege notification program still retained within the body of the mobility regs, given the fact that some states may in fact be determined to not be substantially equivalent and would need to oblige by that process. And so that's really the nature of removing some of the things that were inadvertently deleted. The committee has no action for the CBA, but did adopt a motion to refer to the legislative committee the continuing monitoring of that particular SB 795 bill with respect to those particular items. The next item is item C6, discussion regarding NASBA's activities and CPA Verify. We certainly received a report that the CBA's executive officer attended the annual conference for executive directors and that Dag Sani attended the annual conference for legal counsel as well. Last year, the MSG asked staff to compile a reference list of all state accountancy boards, enforcement contacts, and updated periodically. And part of the context for that is NASBA has been able to figure out who the right contacts are from an enforcement standpoint at these different places. It's not always as evident as, hey, let's contact the enforcement chief. It is unique in every jurisdiction, and so there's some knowledge there that we want to make sure we retain. And then currently staff received the NASBA committee handbook and state board listing, which includes the executive officer's contact information. And since each accountancy board is structured differently, this contact list may provide the best or the most helpful information for the CBA enforcement staff. We talked about CPA Verify, and at this time we have 51 jurisdictions on that. and with 4 states not on there and 1 expected to come on real soon. So that was informational for the group. No action per se for the board there. And then item C7 was proposed agenda items for the next mobility stakeholder meeting, which will include 3 things. 1, or aside from the standing committee items, further review of the 10 jurisdictions that are not yet substantially equivalent, and they are not solely because of their internet disciplinary flag disclosure not being done right now, which is required under our mobility regs. To begin drafting of the final MSG report that ultimately would go to the legislature after coming through the CBA. And then, importantly, to evaluate the factors in 5096.21F2, which really requires some judgment and opinion with respect to the current program and whether it is more or less or equivalent in the protection it affords the public from its predecessor program. So again, those were informational items for the board here, but that we will be tackling at our May meeting. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or discussion from the board? Any public comments? Okay, with that, thank you very much. All right, moving on to item 9, the acceptance of the minutes. So we were going to go ahead and see if we can get a motion to approve the minutes for January 26, 2017, CBA board meeting, minutes of January 26, 2017 Committee on Professional Conduct meeting, minutes on January 26, Legislative Committee, minutes for November 17, 2016 Mobility Stakeholder Group meeting, minutes of December 8, 2016 Enforcement Advisory Committee, minutes for December 9th, 2016 Peer Review Oversight Committee.
I move approval of all the minutes you just identified in item 9A through F.
You're the best. All right. So first from Mr. Campos, is there a second?
My apologies.
So, and the second from, I'm assuming that's a second from Mr. Silverman? All right. So, any discussion? Any public comments? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson?
Yes.
Sunny Youngsung Park?
Yes.
Jin Oyang?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
And Alicia Burhow.
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 10A, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Report on meetings of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants attended by a California Board of Accountancy representative. Anyone? No? All right. So we're going to be that way. All right, moving on to item B, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. Report item 1. Report on meetings of National Association of State Boards of Accountancy attended by a California Board of Accountancy representative. We're going to go to item A. That is my report on the NASBA Accountancy February 1st, 2017 Pacific Regional Conference Call. So I was on that call that day along with our Executive Officer, Patty Bowers. The call discussed this conference call discussed various topics as noted on the agenda, and each board was asked to provide information on its current activities and provide a challenge it is currently or presently facing. So for activities, I reported that in the July 2016 meeting, the CBA adopted regulations to require prescribed continuing education for licensees who perform preparation engagements as their highest level of service, and that it was anticipated that the regulations would be finalized this year in 2017. Additionally, I conveyed that in November 2016, the CBA reviewed the newly adopted Statement on Standards for Continuing Professional Education Programs and will be considering changes to CBA regulations to incorporate nano learning, blended learning, and the 1/5 credit program measurement. And that effective on January 1st, 2017, the current 10 semester unit ethics study educational requirement for CPA licensure changed to include a minimum of 3 semester or 4 quarter units in courses devoted to accounting ethics, or accountants' professional responsibilities, and to require units to come from courses in specified subjects relating to ethics as opposed to the prior language that required specified items in the course title. And for a challenge, I reported that the CBA will be relocating its offices after being in the same location for over 20 years, and that the CBA is working on coordinating the move of approximately 110 staff in early April 2017. Looking forward to that. So with that, we'll go to item 2 and report from the NASBA Accountancy March meeting with executive directors and legal counsel.
Yes, so thank you. So I was pleased to get approval from the governor's office to actually attend this annual conference. Once a year, NASBA puts on a conference for executive directors and their legal counsel. Deputy Attorney General Carl Sani has been the sole person representing California for several years, and so it was nice to actually be in attendance. I've included a copy of the agenda for you. I won't go over each item in interest of time, and I'm sure you would appreciate me not going over each item. But I will share, and it doesn't stand out really, I don't think, on the agenda, but they had a great dialogue at this conference about holding board meetings on college campuses. And it was great timing because in working with President Burhow, we will be holding it looks as though we worked out the details so that we can hold our September CBA meeting at CSU Fullerton. And so NASBA spent a good portion of time talking about how to, when you hold board meetings, make them very effective for the students so that you actually get student participation and not just show up and have your regular board meeting, that you really do need to adjust. And so they've offered their resources to work with us on how to make that really successful. And so that was one of the great takeaways. And just also then networking with the other EDs. It's much easier once you have a rapport established with other EDs. If there is an issue that you need to talk about, to be able to pick up the phone, have a conversation, and those conversations tend to be a lot more effective. And so with that, if Mr. Sani, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
It's been a privilege over the last, I think, 4 years to represent the Board of Accountancy at this conference. The conference is split between the executive directors and the legal counsel. There are some joint sessions. This year, I was on a group of 3 that addressed tips on handling audit investigations. And so we use these seminars basically as a forum to learn what other states are doing, the legal issues that are arising. What with mobility, we find a lot of common issues. The use of AICPA investigations to assist state investigations. Just a variety of issues that come up in the states, what's being litigated, how they're being addressed. And it, as Patty indicated, it's a great forum to simply get to know the counsel from other states, because we often find unique issues that we have not addressed before in our state, and it gives us an opportunity to reach out to other states and see how they've addressed it. So I found the conference is very valuable and worthwhile.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you for making the trek.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it, Mr. Kaplan.
Where was it held? Because I was looking at the thing and it doesn't...
New Orleans. New Orleans.
No.
Is right?
Why is it that we do not attend the AICPA? Is this the annual meeting that you're referring to?
This is the NASBA's annual ED and legal counsel conference.
No, but going back to 10A1, on this agenda, the AICPA's meeting, annual meeting.
So the agenda item 10A1, we keep that there as a standing item so that if any member attends an AICPA meeting, that they can then come back and report. But generally, the reason we're not attending AICPA meetings routinely is out-of-state travel for us is very difficult, and so we're very selective in putting requests forward to the governor's office that we can really identify a good message of why it's important we're there and what the consumer protection benefit is of us being there.
I would only say that their annual meeting, when I served on one of their technical resource panels, we all attended the annual meeting in Washington, D.C., and it was excellent.
We have no doubt that it's excellent. It's just a matter of getting money. Well, approval. So approval from the governor.
Well, and there's a clear connection between state boards and the national umbrella of state boards versus the broader AICPA, I think, in terms of supporting, getting to these conferences.
Okay, moving on to item 2, report on committee meetings of NASBA boards of accountancy attended by California Board of Accountancy members. So there's no communications report from Mr. Kaplan, so we'll go ahead to report on the January 19th, 2017 Enforcement Resources Committee meeting with Ms. Salazar.
Great, well, thank you. So I was pleased to be able to represent this board as a committee member. This was my first meeting. It was very lengthy. I did do it remotely, so I did conference call in, and there was a lot of time spent on orientation, really a deep dive into what the charge of the committee is. And I'll share that with you because everybody here may not be familiar, but the Enforcement Resources Committee is to promote effective, efficient, and where appropriate, uniform enforcement of professional standards by state boards of accountancy. So it dovetails really nicely with the things that we're doing here within our board as well as the mobility stakeholder group. So we spent a lot of time demonstrating and reviewing the enforcement tools web pages that exist. There was extensive conversation about the DOL referrals, which we've already touched upon today, and how to improve the communication flow to individual state boards. There was a significant amount of time devoted to what the NASBA folks call the Enforcement Review Project or the California Mobility Initiative. So this is our practice privilege initiative that we've been discussing for several years here. And again, you are very well aware of where we stand, but that is a key component of this committee, and they're very concerned about getting all of the jurisdictions to a point where there is substantial equivalency, and NASBA, again, continues to work diligently to try to get those final few states and entities, not everybody's state, into the same substantial equivalency. And so with that, the last part of the meeting really had to do with strategic planning for the rest of the year. And the next committee meeting will be May 16th, and I'd be happy to report after the next meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Should I still do public comment if it's just a report? All right, I'll do public comment. Is there any public comment? All right, hearing none. Thank you very much. Item C, report on the February 22nd, 2017 Computer-Based Testing Administration Committee conference call with Mr. Silverman.
I have nothing to report about that call, but I do have a report that there's a May 10th call, which I'll be participating on remotely.
Okay, great. All right, any questions? Any public comment? Oh, is that your heart beating? Weird. Okay, there you go. All right. Wow. See what happens when I sit next to you? This is what happens. All right. Sorry. It's almost over, guys. All right, any public comment? Okay. Item D, report on the January 24th, 2017 Continuing Professional Education Committee conference call with Ms. Wright.
Thank you. Much of the time is spent on orientation. After that, the topic, which is, I think, to be developed and discussed at our April conference call, was the nano learning and the blended learning, the regulations, and the feedback that NASBA is receiving from the various state boards as they adopt these rules. I will comment that as we all introduced ourselves, that one of the members from the Wisconsin State Board listed as her sole and exclusive occupation being a continuing education provider. And I did ask the NASBA representative if it was their opinion that that posed some sort of a conflict of interest in light of our discussion, and she said no.
I don't think that's something we should be discussing on this item.
Okay, I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Okay, any questions? Any public comment? Okay. Is there anything else, Ms. Wright?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to closing business, item 11. Do we have any public comments? All right, seeing none. Item B, agenda items for future California Board of Accountancy meetings. What do we got?
This is, so if there's any that haven't been discussed today that members want to identify, and then we can work to calendar those.
Yeah, is there anything specific anyone would like to discuss at a future meeting? All right, seeing none. All right, we were going to go ahead and start, and we can move into closed session. All right, so I need to read this. So we're going to move into closed session. Item A, pursuant to Government Code Section 11126, C3, the California Board of Accountancy will convene into closed session to deliberate on disciplinary matters, stipulated settlements, default decisions, and proposed decisions. Item B, the board will convene in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E1 to confer with and receive advice from legal counsel on litigation Ned Allen Leva versus California Board of Accountancy, Sacramento Superior Court, case number 34-2016-08002453. I'm sorry? All right, and then at this point, we are going into recess. Thanks very much.